Okay, so Bismillah. So left wing is the left wing and right wing is the right wing, and I've made it more interesting for you guys. So the more right you go, the more the system believes in political individualism, whereby the individual is given less duties to society and more individual freedom. And on the left-hand side is where they still believe in individuals being free and being liberated and so on and so forth, but they're given more obligations towards each other in order to convey that freedom, to help facilitate that freedom amongst each other. So basically, on the left-hand side, you need society to make you free. On the right-hand side, you need society to leave you alone, right? For you to be free. That's a good way of putting it, if you'd like. Now, you'll probably see some very confusing things, like, I don't get it. Why is fascism linked to a bit of conservatism, and it's also linked to socialism? Those are two very fundamentally opposing things. But might I remind you that the Nazi party, why are they called the Nazis? Right, does anyone know why they're called the Nazis? Nazis? Sorry? National Socialist. So they were both nationalists and socialists. Socialism for the German people and no other people, within their territory. So it's about duty to the state, and the German National Socialists were certainly believed that fellow Germans can share resources, the means of production can be owned by the state for the sake of the nation. Right? Whereas a socialist is not nationalist necessarily, because a socialist believes that their ummah is the workers or the people there. Socialists are more internationalists. So Nazis and nationalists both hate socialists, because socialists are not nationalist. Right? They think that everyone's the working class versus the bourgeois. So in essence, the working classes are the ummah of the socialists. They are their people, their community. So as you can see, so fascism is really hard to classify, because it's not good. Like, people say it's the far right. They say fascists are far right, but far right implies they want to go back to some time in the past. But fascists are very they innovate new social circumstances they think is better for the nation. Right? So, for example, in Nazi Germany, they had companies where the boards had a mixture of both the top-level executives, a representative of the workers, and mid-level managers, all being advising or consulting on the boards of each company, because they thought that makes the companies more efficient. That supports the nation. Fascists are all about making the nation strong. That's where the term comes from. Fascist, from the Italian word or the Latin word fascia, meaning to basically, it's like a bundle of sticks together. Basically, you can't break them. So it's about strength. It comes from that Roman symbol of an axe. An axe with its handle going through a bundle of sticks tied together, so you can't break it. It was actually a symbolic object that Romans carried into the Senate to illustrate that Romans were better united. So that's where it comes from. Okay, so yeah, but it's pretty hard. So fascists are not center, but they are hard to classify, because they both want to bring back some imagined golden age in the past that never existed, but using modern institutions and creating modern myths. So are they really want to take things back into the past, or are they want to just take a few ideas in the past, or a romanticized past, and then to create a new myth for the future? It's hard to classify fascists, basically. Some people say that they're from the right. Some people say that historically fascists are from the left. There's a big debate amongst political philosophers on this matter. As you can see, Neo-Marxism is kind of parallel with social democracy. It's basically, let's say, socialism light, you could say, in a liberal state. And postmodernism, as you can see, is somewhere, it's this woolly concept at the bottom there, because postmodernism or post-Marxism affects every school of thought. It's basically, it teaches people about, it teaches people its perception of language itself, that language is arbitrary, it's constantly changing, meta-narratives are not to be believed, but that doesn't mean now that people abandon the meta-narratives of being liberal or being conservative or being social democrat or socialist or Marxist, but they might adopt a more pragmatic approach to say, well, okay, maybe there's the historic inevitability of Marxism isn't true, but maybe pragmatically Marxism is very good to help individuals flourish with the considerations that kind of postmodernism tells about. You don't need to know about that so much, but we will mention where postmodernism has affected things like critical race theory or the Neo-Marxist frameworks. It has affected the thinkers. There's difference of opinion amongst critical race theorists concerning it. But anyway, as I like to do, I want to start out with a question to get your brains all whirling. Nothing about Zionism today, of course. But today is the question, what is a white person? It's this strange creature I've been hearing about. I don't know where it's located. What do you think is a white person? Just from the back.
I just used to think it refers to the color of skin. But yesterday morning, I would say yesterday evening, I was in a workshop. And over there, I was told that a white person is a social construct. So, I'm not sure. But that's I'm not sure what the answer, but
Yeah.
So it's either a person who's got a white color or a social construct. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So yeah.
Okay, so a white person is a social construct. Okay, you, madam?
A white person would be a label for the dominant class or group in society.
Okay, so a white person will be a label for the dominant class or ruling group in society. But let's say, for example, would you describe the ruling class in society in Japan as being white because they are the ruling class?
I'm saying that's in this world, like how people described as white people are all over the world, and what I say is that a white person would be a label for that superior ethnic race or group.
But which ethnic race or group?
That would be Caucasians.
Caucasians, okay, so it's a term for everyone that came from the Caucasus, potentially, you think. Okay, anyone else on this side? No, we're going to move it then to you brother.
Maybe like Anglo-Saxons or Europeans, like.
Maybe Anglo-Saxons or Europeans. Yeah. So Russians aren't white people then. Or Lebanese aren't white people because they're not Caucasian, nor are they European. But some of them look really, really kind of palish, or not exactly North European pale, but some sorry, lighter in skin, of course. Anyone else? What is the white person? You, brother?
Perhaps Westerners, especially when there was a divide between black and white, so that white term might have carried over from there.
So to describe Westerners,
yeah.
But then the question would be, then are Russians not white people then?
Probably are, but as a white person stereotypically.
As a white person stereotypically, it would be, yeah, but so then you say, okay, but what would be the definition of white person? You're saying, okay, it's typically you see it in Europeans, but what is the description of the white person? What would be a white person?
A person in the West.
A person in the West.
In my opinion, yeah.
A person in the West. Okay, let me flip the question on its head. What is a black person? No? You're so confident with the white one, but now you're less confident. On this side, you.
In the West, someone refers to a black race, someone with African roots, darker skin, curly hair. That characteristics of
someone with African roots, darker skin, and curlier hair.
We compare them with whiter people. White people usually don't have that.
Okay, so like the average Egyptian it would be a black person. Because they are darker skin, curlier hair, and they're African roots. Yes, good question. Okay. All right, I'm going to be mean to you guys because I studied ethnology and diversification of the human family. Yeah? So there's it's not as clear cut as you think. I was going to say it's black and white, but it was Perhaps not the right thing to say, or perhaps the most apt thing to say, who knows. Okay, anyone else? What's the definition of a black person then? Since you failed to give a good definition of a white person, would you do better? Yes?
Somebody whose skin color is black and is probably of African origin, but this will not apply to Kanye West. Anybody other than Kanye?
Anybody other than Kanye West?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, so someone who, you say okay, a black person is someone who's black. That's kind of a tautology.
But no, so somebody who has roots from Africa, so, as the brother said earlier.
So roots from Africa, so basically, well, because I'm part North African, so am I part black?
Well, if
Africa's a big continent. It's like saying, that's the definition of an Asian, anyone from Asia. It's like, okay, but then, Asian culture, they have pakore and they have, masala and so on. It's like, yeah, but that's not all Asians, is it? Right? You can't. Now it's generalization. It's a continent. It's a very massive continent. A lot of diversity in that continent. Not all one size fits all type classifications. Yeah.
So then it's probably more of a social construct once again,
Social construct. Okay, you brother.
I think it arises from the Western Hemisphere.
It arises from the Western Hemisphere. Okay.
Concept white people and black people, because Islamic or any Islamic society, it wouldn't be white or black, it would more be fair or dark.
So you say it'd be more like fair or dark. Well, if you look at the preponderance of melanation throughout the Earth, it follows the equator basically, right? So the closer to the equator you live, obviously with the sun beaming down, with radiation that causes skin cancer, you need some help. You need natural sunblock. Otherwise, you're going to be like the white Australians, where they get 8 times more skin cancer than Aborigines and others that have more melanin than them. It's almost like they weren't adapted to be there. All right. Yeah, so, but Africa isn't the only place that's along the equator now, is it? Yeah. You've got places that are close to the equator, such as obviously South India, and there are many, was it the former MSA president, is actually quite, is he Bengali, right, I believe, yeah? He's quite dark in skin color compared to me or yourself. He's darker, okay? But is he black then? Because he could be darker than people that are black, or called black anyway. But why is he not called black then, if he's got darker skin than many people who are called black, who are considered to be black in society? If he's in the West, to be mistaken as black? Well, not quite, because I don't think he'll ever tell you that he's ever been called a black person before. So what else is going on then? There's more. You, sister.
Okay. Black person is a social construct, so in definition, okay, a black person is a person from a racialized society, whereas a white person is a person from a non-racialized society. Okay,
so a white person is a person from a non-racialized society, and a black person is a person from a racialized society.
Yes.
But wouldn't you say that a society that obviously, well, let's say where whites are dominant, they are in a racialized society, they just happen to be on the top rank of that society?
So you're saying that, okay, how can this apply in a country where its dominance be referred to as dominantly black?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, do we have a definition? It's not a trick question to anyone. I know you might think, okay, what's going on? But it's just simply, what would be a definition? How would you define white person, black person? Interestingly enough, when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said there's no superiority, he didn't say of a white person over a black person. He said over a red person over a black person, and a black person over a red person. Didn't use the term white, interestingly enough. Yeah, but you think Arabs would be a mixture, well, they're a spectrum of colors and so on. Obviously, in Arabia, you've got many of the typical Khalijis, people from Arabian Peninsula would look like of skin tone approximating many Indian subcontinent tones as well. They're not that far away. despite the fact they are racist against people from Pakistan and India, who the workers amongst them, there's recorded racism against them. Anyway, so I just want to get your brains moving on this, because if someone was to say, for example, that okay, well, a person who's black, if they are literally, the skin color is actually black, then most people wouldn't be black, because no one actually has literally black skin color. Some of you say that Nilotic peoples in Central Africa are close to, if not some actually almost kind of jet black, but most of them don't. In South Africa, actually, it's lighter skin because they're further away from the equator. Yeah. If you was to say it was a type of having short curls, for example, well, then that would exclude a lot of Somalis, because Somalis don't have short curls. They have curls similar to an Egyptian might, comparable, and Ethiopians. They also, if you say it's a type of nose shape, like maybe it's a rounded nose, someone must have a rounded nose to have the typical phenotypical features that distinguish. Again, Somalis have usually longer noses, similar to Arabs, actually. So then that means they're not black by that definition. But people say, but in here we would call them black in Canada and United States of America. So the question is, what is a white person and a black person? Well, it depends who you ask and what criteria. But in essence, in the ancient world, there really wasn't much uses of these such terms. Yeah, they would just simply describe, well, okay, the Greeks encountered Ethiopians first, and so they called everyone from Africa that was of darker skin to Ethiopians, but that was typical, right? The Muslims encountered the Franks first in Europe, of Western Europeans, Franks, so they called everybody Farangi. All Europeans are Farangi. Even the Anglo-Saxons, all the Crusaders were called Farangi, even though you had Germans and English, because they called them based on the first ethnic group they found and say, okay, well, you all look similar, so we're going to name you by the collective identification thing. Upon the first kind of ethnonym that we encountered, we'll just use that as a generalization for all you guys. So, in the ancient world, white and black wasn't used so much, right? Although by the time of the Prophet Muhammad, he didn't use, it wasn't white-black, and even though the translations say that, which is incorrect, it was red. Why? Because people who have less melanation, you can see redness at times through their skin. It was almost viewed that the skin was almost, well, not transparent, but you could see underneath it, basically. So the extreme isn't like white versus black, but the other extreme is basically it's basically transparent, so you can see the redness underneath. Right? Anyway, so what this lecture is about? Big, massive disclaimer for any of you who thought that this was what's going to debunking critical race theory. Just like yesterday when I talked about refuting Zionism doesn't mean that you are anti-Semitic. The prevalence of racism, the statistics, the historical evidence, the economic evidence of disparities and things like this, the recorded prevalence, the documented prevalence, people's testimonial prevalence of the recorded testimonial perception of the prevalence of injustice, hatred and harms caused by kibr and asabiya, which is called racism in the West, but in Islam we have our own terms. Kibr and asabiya is much more precise, which we'll get into. This lecture will not challenge any of these facts. Why? Because they're facts. Because they are recordings of observations. Statistics record observations. Yeah, economic statistics, surveys, all this stuff record observations. So no one's here to dispute observations. I know some conservatives do, and some liberals do, because they believe that liberalism and conservatism are so perfect a system that that once implemented properly, you would not have racism anymore. Everyone would just hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And of course, Neo-Marxists would argue against that, saying that, oh, you're just doing that because you're racist and you want to hide that fact. But really, no, for most cases, no, they just are they believe so much in their system that they think it's working. Yeah? And they just think that, oh, the prevalence of crime and in minority communities is because they're not pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps. That's what because a conservative believes that in a society which, such as under their ideology, where everyone is given freedom to do what they wish by the law, the state's not interfering with you, everyone can make money if they have good ideas and they're clever enough, that it's meritocratic. Yeah, strictly meritocratic. So they would, because they believe in their system so much, they play down race. They don't deny that people are racist, but they play down the prevalence of it, or they play down which you might call, what is described as systematic racism, or institutional racism that might exist across the board. So this lecture won't be debating these observations, because these are statistical observations. We're not here to debate that. Then what are we here to discuss then, if we're not discussing these statistics? We are discussing the explanation behind the statistics. Theory is not, why do you call these? They're called theories, or all theories are called theories, I suppose, and not facts. Does anyone know why a theory is called a theory and a fact is called a fact? Sister back there.
A theory cannot be proven through scientific testing, so that's why. And then a fact can be. It can be disproven or proven.
Okay, so the sister said a theory cannot be proven by scientific testing, but a fact can be proven by, obviously, scientific testing or observation. Kind of. Some theories can be proven, like, for example, the heliocentric theory or geocentric theory at one point was a theory, and now we kind of proved it. But at the time, it wasn't able to be verified by the Greeks and others. But now it can be verified. What would you say the difference between a fact and theory?
A fact is a reality revealed, whereas a theory is just something that explains what's going on and what is present.
Okay, perfect, sister. She said that facts are basically what you ascertain by observation or by evidence, clear evidence. They're the evidences themselves. And theory are explanations of those facts, right? Explaining the causes of those facts, the underlying causes. So we're going to be discussing whether critical race theory correctly explains the causes behind racism, and we'll be assessing it versus other models that assess the cause of racism. Now, long story short, the liberal would simply say to you that racism is caused by people just with their free will just being evil and what have you. But they probably will say racism is just a relic of a past time, and that anyone who's still racist is because they're still keeping the relic of these ideas. But once we've implemented equality under the law and we have an education system that tells everybody don't be racist, and then people publicly will say, yeah, I'm not racist anymore, to the point that it's not socially, no one goes around saying, yeah, I'm a racist and everything. They can't say that anymore, so that's sufficient. Right? The liberal is like, job done. Yeah, on to the next thing. Yeah, whereas, well, we still see racism in liberal societies. We still see racism not just in the West. We see racism in every single country on planet Earth, and we see all kinds of different types of racism between all kinds of different types of ethnic groups, regardless of which color you are, what language you speak. Everyone seems to be racist. How does the Neo-Marxists explain this, and how does what would be an Islamic explanation behind this? So let's have a look. But first, let us talk about what is critical race theory. So critical race theory is a critical theory where we mentioned that yesterday from neo-Marxist perspective. Critical theory is both an explanation and an attempt to change. Right? That's what makes it different from a simple theory, like how liberals would view theory. It's an explanation behind the cause of something and a means to change it at the same time. They're called critical theories. And every neo-Marxist application in race, gender, sexuality, orientation, all this stuff, they're all called critical theories. Okay, this is simply the application of neo-Marxism into this, because Karl Marx said that previously philosophy was just about explaining the world, but it should be about changing it. So the neo-Marxists took that, Marx's ideas, and said, okay, our philosophy is a philosophy of praxis, of changing, of practicality, of how do we practically change. And so it's called critical theory because the method is they want to refute the Western kind of ideology that's dominant ideology. They want to refute it as a means to change it. Okay, and of course bring in their own explanations to kind of in place of the dominant Western ideology, which is currently liberalism and its kind of its brother conservatism. So. A critical theory, it's a critical theory aimed at exposing the origin of racism in societies, namely that such racism is structural, systemic and institutional in order to change it. Racism is described as discrimination based on race, i.e. not treating as equal. Because remember, the argument is that the basis behind good and bad is equality. Okay, so being at having more power than someone else means that you're subjugating them. Okay, yes, subjugation causes what they call harm, but it's not the harm issue that is the origin of evil. The origin of evil is the inequality. The harm comes as a result of the inequality. So yes, harm is the issue that they're trying to reduce, they'll say, or alienation, as Marx would say, but it arises from inequality. So they have to deal with the inequality, and then you deal with the harm. Institutional racism, you don't need to be a neo-Marxist to believe in the concept called institutional racism. A liberal can believe it too. It just means that if you have a police department, a school, a local government administration department, where they're so filled with racists that the collective product of that institution is going to be racist and discriminatory, because they're so filled with racists in it that the entire collective group produces racist outcomes. A liberal can believe that, no problem. In fact, a liberal even invented that term in the 1960s, so it wasn't the Marxists at all. But they used it. It's interesting. But Marxism, or the neo-Marxism, you can hear it when they say racism is structural. You say, that's a neo-Marxist. That's definitely a neo-Marxist or Marxist. In fact, the Marxist conference, I traced this back to a Marxist conference in the early 1960s, which first used the term structural racism that I could find. Because Karl Marx has an idea of what structure is, and we'll get to that just in the next slide, but if anyone says that, it's described as racism that exists within the ideology and culture of society, including its physical institutions, like media and government and so on and so forth, police, which emerged from a racial hierarchy in the structure of society. So it emanated from an economic system 400 years ago that still is with us, and so it is now hidden in the ether between the spaces of these physical, and within these physical institutions, it's in this thing called, this ghostly canopy above us called the structure, okay? Which makes it hard to find, because then, like, where is the structure exactly? You know, but they'll explain it because it exists in people's minds and exists as beyond the mind, and it's kind of, that's where they have issues with trying to locate it. Or rather, they'll say, well, it's located here, but then you say, well, I want specifics, and you're meant to be materialists too, so give me, specifics. But they will agree that it also exists within people's heads as well, people's minds. And of course, systemic racism, or not to be confused with structural racism. Systemic racism is just simply that if you combine all the institutions together, all the racist institutions together, you get it being systemic, and then structural is the system plus the ideology, right? So all these institutions plus the ideology that dominates it. Okay. So critical race theory is about exposing the origin of racism, and it basically exposes it that exists in the structure of society, and not just the hierarchy of it, but also within the ideology, the culture, and so on and so forth. It emanates from ideas or culture that ultimately emanate from an economic system. That's what makes you a critical race theorist, I suppose, or just a neo-Marxist, generally speaking, because a neo-Marxist would say the same thing about gender disparities, about sexual orientation disparities, and so on and so forth. Okay, why is critical race theory called a neo-Marxist framework? Am I just saying that? Nope. The two main thinkers who coined critical race theory, Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, who is also I mispronounced the name there. So it's Crenshaw. Who's also notable for inventing the term intersectionality and also being a feminist. She writes in the book Critical Race Theory. So I'm like no one's going to say that she's not a critical race theorist. She's actually one of the OGs of the critical race theory in terms of thinkers. She says critical scholars derive their vision of legal ideology in part from the work of Antonio Gramsci, an Italian neo-Marxist theorist who developed an approach to understanding domination which transcends some of the limitations of traditional Marxist accounts. He's called neo-Marxist because he kind of moved away from old Marxism and try to better understand how ideology maintains itself and reproduces itself and survives in society, even if you change the demographics around or you change the economic system. So critical race theory is essentially the top scholars of it, or the leading founding scholars, they would say itself it emanates from neo-Marxist thinkers. It's not just a label, a pejorative term. Okay, so for anyone that wasn't here for Tuesday and anyone that wasn't here yesterday, I'm going to help. I'm just going to give you a recap. So if you're a Marxist and you're a materialist, you have to explain where religion, politics, culture comes from. So quite simply, society has two components, the base and the superstructure. The base is all the economic stuff. It's the factories, it's the a lumberjack with his chainsaw or an axe or what have you. This is the base, what produces the material goods. Because the materialists would say that the first thing humans did was they made stuff together to survive, and culture comes afterwards. But if that's the case, then culture comes from, and language comes from economic production then, right? So I know it sounds crazy, but that's exactly what he argues. Exactly what he argues. So, that was Marx's idea. And Marx explains that your mind is a mixture, or your mind is a reflection of all of what society is reflected in your mind. So that's a little picture of a hierarchy there in the person's mind, and it comes from the economic system. So you live in a society with an economic system, with economic relations which also are the same as social relations. They're all one and the same thing. So if there's a hierarchy in society, it's reflected into your mind too. Okay? So if the bourgeois are on top ruling, then your culture, your religion, your politics are bourgeois culture, religion, and politics, the ruling capitalists basically. Okay, that's just a little recap for Karl Marx. It's very important because critical race theory will be based on this thing. This is what makes it different from other theories of racism. Okay, so Marxism kind of made a number of predictions about what would happen in Europe, a great workers' revolution. It didn't happen. There was no workers' revolution in the most advanced capitalist societies. Karl Marx was basically wrong, right? And neo-Marxists came in, like Gramsci, to try to explain why Karl Marx's predictions didn't work, didn't come out to be the way they were. And they explained it that once the superstructure is created by the economic system, if you destroy the economic system or you change it, or you try to make it fairer or what have you, the superstructure has now a life of its own, right? And it will try to preserve itself. It will resist, right? Even if you see changes on the ground, the structure will preserve itself. That's what makes you neo-Marxist. If you think that, you're a neo-Marxist basically. That's what makes you neo-Marxist. Okay. So then let's just go through then the tenets of critical race theory, what they believe. And, I've often found in society different people say the word tenant. It's like, it's not a lodger that lives in your flat, right? But tenet, guys, right? Anyway, so the first main tenet of critical race theory derived from this. Okay, so let me explain just briefly the origin. So Derek Bell was involved in law in the United States of America. Obviously, he was around during the time of the civil rights movement in America, where they had the Jim Crow laws in the South. So after African Americans didn't have the right to vote given to them during the 1960s, they had the right to vote given to them during the 1860s. Yeah. But then, what was all this civil rights movement happening for? Well, because in the South, they were worried that, obviously, African Americans who used to be, obviously, form large majorities in many areas, they would elect representatives who are African American. They would then go into the individual state legislators of the southern states, and even eventually into the federal government. So they didn't like that very much because, obviously, you can racist reasons, and of course, they didn't trust the fact that these people who were their slaves would treat them nicely or be so concerned about their rights after 100 years of being treated as slaves, right? And it's not conducive to fostering unity and sympathy and love. So they didn't trust it, so they implemented segregation laws, separate but equal. So African Americans had the right to vote, and they had the right to shop and buy and things and enter into contracts, but they were to be kept separate from white people in the South. Right, as you know, separate but equal was there, because that doesn't violate the American Constitution. As long as everyone's equal under the law, the federal government couldn't argue against it. But the issue is that they also implemented Jim Crow codes, which made it harder for African Americans to register to vote. Right? And they would do a lot of shenanigans during election times where it would be very difficult, practically speaking, for an African American to actually find a voting booth to vote, or even be allowed to register for it, to meet a long criteria. Now, here's what they did. They applied a very long criteria of things you need to satisfy before you can register to vote. They just selectively didn't apply that on white voters, but they maintained it on black voters. So in theory, everyone has to meet those criteria. They just happen to not apply it when a white person comes in to register to vote. Yeah, it's quite similar to how Israel treats Palestinians. It has a law for everybody in many areas. It just doesn't apply it to the settlers and all the such, but they apply it to the Palestinians basically. So very similar. So the civil rights movement was about removing separate but equal and just leave it as equal and with equal opportunity as well, no segregation, and of course there's many other horrors of that, but I'm summarizing for the sake of time. So Derek Bell studies American law, studies federal law, and he argues that the law is colorblind. It doesn't concern itself on race. You might think that's a good thing. Well, he'll say no, because the law assumes that, like for example, let's say you're starting a race, okay? And one person starts the race, the gun shoots and they start the race, and another person's kept back for 5 minutes, and then they start the race afterwards. Who's going to win the race? Even though the rules of the race are the same, but if you start one person first and the other person second, well, the first person to go wins, isn't it? So if you have a law system whereby at the get-go, white Americans already have economic and financial advantages, it's not going to be equal outcomes, is it? Or equal opportunities, is it, right? So Derek Bell sees the federal law, and he decides that the law he feels is actually favoring white people because they have certain conditions that they started off in, which is more wealth and so, whereas black people didn't start off with those same conditions after emancipation, so there's a disadvantage in the system. So they first started the discipline of critical legal studies, but they felt that critical legal studies was too much focused on the working classes generally, because all the Marxists, right, they said the working class is our main concern. I said, working class, but what about the black working classes? And so they kind of branch off with Kimberly Crenshaw, and they form critical race theory to discuss how black people in America are disadvantaged But how to explain this disadvantage? Is it because, again, you just say, right, we emancipate black people in America, we don't give them any resources or compensation or like, you know, even an apology. There you go. You're under a free system now with equal law for everybody, but you have nothing in your pocket and you've just got the shirt on your back. Yeah, it's going to be, you're not going to be at a similar advantage to somebody who has inherited, you know, like a family home and land and things like that. You're not going to be in the same starting positions. Anyway, so that's why critical race theory was and is popular. But the explanation behind this is although they might accept that makes sense, but they would say no, there's something else going on. There's structural racism. There's this hidden hand of racism, which is part of the structure that is keeping these things, keeping racial disparities there in America, basically. Now, I say America because this is where critical race theory comes out from. Okay, it technically wasn't designed for other countries, because they were really focused on America and its specific reality. But eventually, they would want to, others, new people coming into critical race theory would want to apply it everywhere, in every country. You know, even in countries, you might say, oh, yeah, we'll apply in England. Look at how minorities are treated in England. And I say, yeah, but you can't say they are treated unfairly because there was a structural racism that was created 400 or 500 years ago. 400 or 500 years ago, there's only Anglo-Saxons, Welsh and Scottish people. But there's only, white people in England. England wasn't designed with a racial hierarchy in mind, ever, right? It just had immigrants coming in at some point in the late 19th and 20th century. There was no, the economic system was already established before immigrants of minorities coming in. It doesn't seem to make sense, but it doesn't stop them from applying it, though, because they're Neo-Marxists. They have to explain the whole world via their assumptions. Anyway, so the first tenet of critical race theory is they criticize liberalism. A critical race theorist or a Neo-Marxist, if you say to them, you've got liberal ideas, and they'll be very angry at you because they hate liberalism. Even though them and liberals and Neo-Marxists would agree on things like, you know, people should be allowed to do zina, and that's fine. People should be allowed to drink alcohol. People should be allowed to same-sex marriage should be permitted. They'll agree on all those things, but you think they agree on those things because they're liberal. No, they agree on those things because they're socialist and Marxist, or Neo-Marxist. So you call them liberal, they'll be very angry with you. And they say, how dare you call me liberal? I'm not liberal. But they follow the Western Enlightenment ideas still, right? They just follow a different madhab. Yeah, it's like basically, it's the equivalent of, let's say, you know, you meet a Muslim you meet someone who's a Shia, and they say, oh, I believe in the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. You're Sunni, right? And they'll get very angry at you, right? Because, well, yes, technically, you know, Sunnis believe that too, but not only Sunnis, right? So anyway. So the second main tenet is race realism, racism as normalcy. So in the liberal narrative, racism happens very exceptionally because you don't hear people say, you know, racist terms like in those movies in the South where, you know, a southerner sees a black person, says something racist, a racist term to them. It doesn't happen like that. They will say it happens, it is normal, and it happens all the time, even if you don't know it. As in, you are being racist all the time, even if you don't know it, basically. So it's normal, and it's meant to be, and they'll say, it is meant to be as it is. This is what the society was constructed for. It's deliberate. The racism in society is deliberate. It's part of the structure. It's what the structure does. Right, it's what the structure orders and demands. And the third thing is the social construction of race. Now going back to that question, they'll say, yes, the idea of who is white and who is not depends on the classification system that the Americans adopted. Well, I suppose you could say the English colonies adopted around the late 17th century, where they basically, long story short, so they wanted indentured workers from Ireland, from England. They needed as many people to come to work the fields and the land. But there was there was some complaints amongst the indentured workers. Indentured workers means basically you agree to go to America and they will give you a free ride there, but you then now owe them 7-8 years of work, and your life is controlled by them, almost like a slave basically, except it's for a limited period of time. However, of course, if you make mistakes, you're late for work, you're late by 5 minutes, whatever, years will be added to your time as an indentured worker. Anyway, so there was a bit of a, but they generally have legal rights that the laws of the different colonies recognize. Right? So technically speaking, they're a little more harder to control. There was a rebellion by them. There was by indentured workers. It was actually because they wanted the British government to conquer more land from the natives to have more land for these, because the indentured workers were promised to be given land in return for these years of service. So they weren't really the good guys, of course. And it was realized that indentured workers are a lot of trouble. Whereas then some people suggested, hey, you know what? Why don't we just buy slaves from the West African states? They're really cheap, and basically they don't necessarily have to be given rights because they're slaves, right? We can put them under a different legal category. Yeah, and that's what kind of in a way happened, right? So the slaves are easier to manage because they don't enjoy the same protections of the law, because you create a new legal status. But of course then many slaves are free and liberated, right? They might be freed after some period of time, and then you're going to have an influx of people who in essence you brought them in large numbers and not under the best conditions, and now they become free. And how do you manage all this? So they simply made a very basic code, which is basically, okay, we'll have laws for people called black and people called white, right? That was basically it. Very, very simplistic. They didn't imagine Russians would be coming over or Polish people would be coming over. They didn't think like that. They didn't imagine Arabs that look light-skinned would be coming over. They didn't have them in mind. It was simply for European people versus people brought against their will to be for servitude. And of course there was no other states that selling slaves except that they could find in such numbers except West African states. So that's basically where they got it from. Interesting enough, Christians, when encountering people around the world who were didn't look like them, actually fought everyone, like Muslims, that were from the tribe of Adam, were from Bani Adam, right? They fought the descendants of Adam alayhi salam. For them it was the issue that these people weren't Christian, these people were they thought people are infidels. But you can convert an infidel to being a Christian, okay? So they didn't think that these people as not human, right? That the slave they were importing, they didn't think initially. However, it was the Enlightenment era materialists that, well, if you don't believe in the Bible and you don't believe that we're all from the family of Adam alayhi salam, then what do you mean human, right? And what do you mean, like, how do you know they're even part of the same species as yourself? Don't you see animals with slight variations and then different species? They're the ones who started to make arguments and points, and then some made arguments and points to say, well, maybe they're not fully human as we are, and so we can use them as slaves. Then you see those who are Christian try to retrofit an argument that isn't in the Bible to say it was the curse of Ham, which is that people who are African or darker skinned are part of the children of Ham, which was a biblical figure, who was cursed. Okay, but it doesn't make sense because the children of Ham are the Semites, so it's like Jews and Arabs, so it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, they were playing mental gymnastics, with the Bible, much like liberal Muslims do with the Quran. So anyway, so that's the social construction of race. It comes from there. Some English colonial administrator in the North American territories basically wanted a way to distinguish Europeans from imported slaves, so you said white and black, that's it, right? There was issues with people who they couldn't classify initially, like Chinese, but where do they fit in and all this stuff? They didn't, early on, but generally speaking, that's where it comes from. So now, technically speaking, when neo-Marxists say that race is a construction, a social construction, there's a part truth to that. these categorizations are socially constructed, as in they were made by some person up and became like taken on board. Whereas anthropologists will tell you that you can't really define people by something called race, and it doesn't make, genetically speaking, there's so much variation amongst human beings within one group of people that there's no way to delineate one group from another group. Much, right? You just say, what about phenotype, phenotypical features? But what you call race is just a collection of phenotypical features typical of or in high frequency in one region. That's it, right? But anyway, I was almost going to segue into ethnology, but I won't because, but I could easily do so because it's fascinating actually. Okay. All right, so the rest are quite easy and quick to go through. Whiteness as privilege and property. Neo-Marxists, they just can't get rid of their Marxist origins. So Karl Marx said the difference between the workers and the bourgeois is the bourgeois own property, own capital, right? Wealth that makes more wealth, right? Well, but whiteness is not, being white is not really a property, apart from a meaning of being an attribute, but it's not physical property, right? It's a property attribute, but it's not property, right? They wanted so much to keep the Marxist idea of using property or property explanations to kind of classify classes that they basically called whiteness as property. You might think, what, like you buy it? Well, they wouldn't say you buy it or sell it, but well, they would say you sell it, but you don't lose it. It's weird. So they say it's like capital, right? Capital keeps generating wealth, right? So if you have a white card, American Express, white card, you can pay for goods and services and get a certain level of service for that. But if you don't have the white card, then you don't get access to the same treatment and services and so on and so forth. So in a way, it's being exchanged as a property. It's a currency, basically. And so those who are the ruling classes, the white people in America, they have that as a property. And those who are not white don't have that as a property. So racism as emerging from the social structure, I've already covered that. That's the main key idea of critical race theory. Interest convergence or material determinism. How do you explain why white people got rid of the Jim Crow laws? How do you explain why there was emancipation of slaves in America if white people want to be on top? Surely that would go, if they want to maintain supremacy, why would they do those things? And of course, the neo-Marxists will simply explain that, that's what they want you to think. It was only when it was in their monetary interests did they abolish slavery and did they abolish the separate but equal Jim Crow laws. Okay. Remember yesterday we were talking about how neo-Marxists are conspiratorial. So there's never any benign or good reason or virtuous reason why the class that they're fighting against does anything that appears to be good. It's always done for a negative reason. Now, I don't doubt there were many in that did so, who abolished slavery and so on and so forth because they viewed it in material interest. Adam Smith, for example, said that slaves aren't so motivated as much as paid workers are. Yeah, that's a true point. But the Wilberforce and the Quakers and others who were Christian-based movements who deemed it to be anti-Christian. To maintain the institution of slavery and led powerful lobbies. I don't think, the critical race theory said, well, that's what they want you to think, but I don't think, it's very unlikely they did it because they were going to get money out of it or it was somehow beneficial. They didn't even own slaves, they didn't have any investments in slaves, they were against it. They were a strong movement in the British system to abolish slavery, and the British were the first people to abolish it because of these people's campaignings. And in America, of course, you have the Civil War, you have all this fighting over the issue of states' rights, yes, but it's because they were conquering westward and they didn't want to keep slavery as an institution for the new states. Right, and then the South thought that would threaten them. They was like, well, if we're going to make new states, why does it have to be like what you Northerners say has this with no slavery? That's not fair. Like, why can't we just have? So the critical race theorists will say, That's all. That was just a front. It was all part of the destructive civil war that killed 600,000 American peoples. It was just because it was in the interest to do so, to liberate, in the cause liberate slaves. It's hard to swallow as an explanation, although yes, I do agree that one could argue that Abraham Lincoln wanted to increase the power of federalization over the southern states. That there's an argument in this, but it doesn't fully explain all the data. That's the issue. But the Neo-Marxists would say, no, this is all, they want you to think that, but it was only in their interest, was why they engaged in that civil war and so on and so forth. So anyway, this is where they bring their presumptions. They don't let the evidence speak for itself, they bring presumptions into it. Okay. Differential racialization, they say that in society there's negative stereotyping of minorities. Oh, by the way, just to go back to the interest convergence point, a liberal would clearly argue that the liberal values of many of the founding fathers were against slavery from the beginning. Right? The French Revolution was actually the first state to abolish slavery, and they had no reason to do so because it was against the revolutionary principles of all humans are equal. And because they follow continental philosophy, everyone has a mind, everyone's equal, and so on and so forth. So how would you explain that one? Right? Then it got reversed with the counter-revolution. But anyway, or Napoleon Bonaparte reversed it. But anyway, the inadequacy of color blindness. Oh, this is a big one. So they say just acting like you don't see color is bad. Because they say that, well, it exists and racism exists, so if you pretend that you don't see color because you want to be neutral, you're covering up racism. Yeah, and you're blind to it. So they'll say that definitely. Color-based standpoint subjectivity, so basically, yes, if you are in a minority of some kind, your personal experiences, however you wish to interpret the world, has a higher epistemological value than someone who has an attribute of the dominant classes, whether you're a female, whether you're black, whether you're queer, whether you're what's it called? It's not neurotypical, neuroatypical, whatever. Whether you're disabled, you have a higher epistemology in your statement, right? So, and if anyone challenges you or says, "Can I have evidence?" They are denying your subjectivity. And they are trying to oppress you, basically. If they ask for evidence, they're trying to oppress you. I'm not joking. We'll get to that. So many of the more Marxist of the neo-Marxists, more kind of old guard, they would argue the way to achieve racial equality is wealth redistribution, right? Because the structure is based on the economic base, right? So, but of course, they would say that even if you had a society where proportionally all African Americans had the same amount of wealth proportionally as white Americans, black Americans are still a minority, about 16% or so they're still disadvantaged. So I suppose the only way you could truly have a harmonious system with no racism, according to these economic determinists, is the population is 50-50 white-black with 50-50 wealth going either side, then possibly, but not guaranteed. Here's an interesting one. Many of them who've adopted postmodernism have talked about counter-narrative campaigning, storytelling, to tell stories to white people about what it's like to be black and what it's like to experience racism and so on and so forth. This is the one thing of critical race theory that I actually agree with. This is actually a very good idea, right? But not because it's of neo-Marxists. This is the postmodernist influence where it talks about making counter-narratives, to stereotype, to negative stereotypes. That's a good idea. I totally agree. That's a great idea. Jordan Peele and Key. Jordan Key, is it? Key and Peele, those two guys. Yeah, Key and Peele, yeah. So they've done movies and things, very interesting movies where they've tried to show in very sophisticated ways what it might be like to be a black person in America, basically. And yeah, these are some good things, because it's not using any. Okay, I mean, for the general idea of telling your own story to people so that they can see things through your eyes, in principle is not a problem. Why would we have a problem with that? Telling a different narrative is actually, but it's not only for critical race theorists. This is a universal way of persuading and challenging. So this is the only thing I agree with them, which it's not unique to them. It's the only thing I agree that they say, which I say has good merit in it. Okay, so one of the key issues now, raising racial consciousness. Critical race theorists, like any other neo-Marxist, they say the key to liberation is to create your identity group into an actual faction, movement, or class, basically, to fight against the oppressive classes. So it's not about we as individuals who have a particular attribute we need to just integrate better with society. But no. You need to form your own movement, group, bond with each other first, then fight the rest, fight the ruling classes as a class, basically. So they're all about, they call it race consciousness. And the feminists have gender consciousness. And so on and so forth, and so because they all follow the same methodology, just that they apply it to different angles. Now, of course, as Muslims, Islam would critique this. We'd say that hold firmly to the rope of Allah and do not be divided amongst yourselves. The Aus and Khazraj were two tribes in Medina or Yathrib who had a history of fighting each other. One tribe was the majority, other one was a minority. After Islam came to Yathrib and they united, but some still had some jahiliyyah in them. Some still remembered the old days where they had to fight each other, and they almost burst into natural fight between the two. Okay? Did the Prophet Muhammad say to the minority tribe, well, the only way to get rid of this old jahiliyyah is you guys need to form one class, because you're the minority, against the majority group to fight against them. That's the way you change. That is the way you change the bigotry from the past. Nope. He condemned that they even brought it up, and he called them by one name, like Ansar, the helpers, not the Aus and Khazraj as two separate peoples. Yeah, okay, he used the term now and again, but not. He called them by the collective word. Yeah, so the Ansar. Yeah, so. That would disagree very much with what critical race theory would demand of Muslims, that we separate into, and gender theory and so on, so that we separate into factions in order to fight injustice. For us, that you can't fight injustice by doing something that Islam would consider to be unjust. You can't fight fire by making more fire, basically.
So the way to fight racism is a race war? Is that what they're arguing?
Well, the way to fight racism is race wars. They wouldn't say race wars. They'd simply say that as a minority, they need to be conscious of their oppression, and only when they're conscious of it, that they're being oppressed, can they fight against it, because only they truly realize that they are oppressed. Which is strange, because that means you're saying that they don't realize they're oppressed, but no one else can help them, because only they can realize they're oppressed. But they don't realize they're oppressed at that point in time, but you need to make them realize they're oppressed. It's called raising class consciousness. Oppressed as a class, not oppressed because they have an attribute. Oppressed as a group, that's what they mean by that. Yeah? So, yeah, of course, anyone, like, if you're Arab in America, you're not going to be treated, given a good time on planes and things like that. They would say, if there was a critical race theory for Arabs, they wouldn't say that Arabs need to know that they're treated differently, because Arabs know they're treated differently. But you need to know that you're being treated differently as a class, as a collective group. That's what they are talking about. Okay. Now, I mentioned yesterday and day before, but I'll mention it today again. Sigmund Freud talked about that you can have hidden ideas in your mind that makes you do things. So this makes neo-Marxists all psychoanalysts, because they are going to interpret your actions, and they're going to interpret it in a negative way. Because, of course, if there is racism, and you are part of the system, and the racism benefits you, then you are part of the racism. And hence, everything you do is racist, even if you don't know that you're doing it. Okay. Right. Well, I was going to go through this, but that's not. we really actually mentioned that. Okay, so critical race theory believes in what's called standpoint epistemology. I mentioned this before, but just very quickly, they said that knowledge is socially created, right? There's no knowledge outside of society. So, if you're basically, if someone tells you, say, if knowledge is socially created, then your knowledge in your head is due to your position in society. So you could never know what it's like to be someone who's oppressed, and you could never understand oppression because you're situated in a place where you can't have that knowledge because you're the oppressor. So if someone tells you that they're being oppressed, and they tell you how they're being oppressed and in what way, or how they feel they're being oppressed, then they have more epistemological weight than you do. Right, because if you're not the majority group in any particular situation, so if you're the majority group, then you won't know what their oppression feels like. So, and then you'd have no basis to deny them. They'd say, you have no reason to say they're wrong. Why? Because you are the oppressor or oppressor class, and for you, your privilege is invisible. So if you're denying what they say, or even asking for evidence, you have no reason to do that. Right? Because you should know that you don't know. You could never know unless they tell you. So by stopping them from saying it, you're basically maintaining your oppression over them. They will argue. Okay. Roland Barthes, who is a French philosopher, postmodernist, he would add a few things to neo-Marxist soup. He would simply say that, he called it the death of the author. Books are no longer judged by what the author intends. Right? And he won't say that we should stop caring what the author intends. He simply says that that's what humans have always done. They don't care what the author says. It's all about what they can interpret. So, as you as Muslims, if you say, but the Quran and Sunnah says, they'll say, no, you say, and you're the oppressor class, therefore your interpretation is the oppressor's interpretation. Right? It's not what you don't know what Allah wants, and it's all about what the Quran and Sunnah can do for us, not what we can do for the Quran and Sunnah. Basically, that's their approach. That has affected how they see it. So you say Quran and Sunnah, they'll say no. That's just you, right? Michel Foucault, he would argue that power is manifested by individuals, but oppression can occur. His understanding of oppression would be by following a common narrative that might be a false narrative or a bad narrative, and that you adopt that narrative, and then you are a manifestation of the narrative's oppression. The narrative makes you commit oppression as an individual. Now he left neo-Marxism, but he continued a lot of Marxist ideas in new forms, which is what he was saying. Why I mention him is because he would argue now that in all your social interactions, your personal social interactions, every interaction that you have with someone who is a minority in any characteristic, their sexuality, race, gender, their disability, whatever the case might be, every individual interaction you have with them is you reinforcing unconsciously, whether or not, your superior relations over them, your group's superiority over them. So this would make neo-Marxists basically, obviously, cite concerns of microaggressions. We covered that yesterday as well, microaggressions, whereby you might do things where if the person feels or interprets that what you're doing is offensive against them, that you're exhibiting arrogance against them, or you're judging them by a stereotype that they don't like, right? And it's up to them to decide what that is. Then you're committing a microaggression, and you have to apologize and be sorry for it once they raise it to you. Because you are doing it because you are reinforcing your superiority of your group over them. That's what they would argue. Okay, if you think I just made that up, the critical race theorist, who is actually Japanese, Matsuda, he says racist speech is particularly harmful because it is a mechanism of subordination reinforcing a historical vertical relationship. So racist speech, and he then defines what racist speech means, but to give you an example, I want to give you an example. So let's say you have an organization that your organization wants to eliminate racism, and you want to do so by asking anyone who is subject to racism, whether it's black Muslims, whether it's Kurdish Muslims, because maybe there's majority Turks there, whether it's a majority Khaliji organization and there's minority Pakistanis there, whatever. If you want to eliminate racism, and you speak to you get to the minority Muslims who have minority attribute, let's say, and you say, we'd like you to voice your issues that you're experiencing. We want you to tell us what you're doing, how you're experiencing racism, what we can do to help you. You're reinforcing racism. All right, by doing that, you're like, what? That doesn't make sense. Yeah, well, read on. Does it jump right to here? Yeah, Audre Lorde. Not referring to the reaction you get when you read what she says. Oh Lord, what is she saying? But here we go. She says, whenever the need for some pretense of communication arises, those who profit from our oppression call upon us to share our knowledge with them. In other words, it is the responsibility of the oppressed to teach the oppressors their mistakes. Black and third world people are expected to educate white people as to our humanity. Women are expected to educate men. Lesbians and gay men are expected to educate the heterosexual world. The oppressors maintain their position and evade their responsibility for their own actions. There is a constant drain of energy which might be better used in redefining ourselves and devising realistic scenarios for altering the present and constructing the future. Also, Anne Lopez and Gaetan Jean-Marie, similar to Audre Lorde, saying something similar. They said, we share the theoretical framework of critical race theory that has guided our research and thinking. Educators must examine their positionality, engage in self-reflection, and come to understand what they need to learn and unlearn. It is not the responsibility of black people to teach others how to engage in anti-oppression education while at the same time experiencing the pain, trauma, and suffering of anti-blackness and anti-racism. So, basically, if you want to eliminate racism in your organization or organizations, and you reach out and you say, please tell us, how to do it to people suffering from racism, you're doing it as a pretense, and in reality, you're maintaining racism. You're maintaining supremacy. That's why I say that there's nothing good you can ever do to neo-Marxists, because they're meant to interpret everything you do as being racist, right? The only thing you could do, which they can't argue against, and they'd like, is you basically say, okay, I'm going to shut up. My job is to give you my platform and amplify your voice. Basically, you take control, and we put you above. We put you into control of the management and what have you, to the point they become the majority. Then they would accept that maybe you've got good intentions, but you still have to say you're racist, though. I am racist. I can't change that, but I can only be more aware of my racism. So I'm going to shut up and just I'm going to amplify your voice by giving you my platform. That's how you're meant to treat anyone who argues that, or whether it's sexism, whether it's heteronormativity, whichever attribute. That's how you're meant to approach those things. Brother in the middle.
I have a question. The critical race theory authors, don't they contradict themselves? Like previously they said it is not the responsibility of the oppressed to educate the oppressed.
Yep.
When they said the exact opposite here.
Oh no! They said that, no. They didn't educate. They did not contradict them.
It is not the responsibility. I think the other slide mentioned that it is the responsibility of the oppressed to educate the oppressed.
No, it doesn't say that. The oppressed maintain. No. No, it doesn't say that at all. They're not saying that it's the responsibility. They're not contradicting themselves. Audre Lorde didn't say that the oppressed have a responsibility to educate the oppressors. They're saying that by the oppressors demanding or asking the oppressed to educate them, they're reinforcing this relationship whereby they say you're not human until you tell us why you're human. That's how they're interpreting it. Okay, which is crazy, isn't it? It's a crazy interpretation, but that's exactly how they interpret it, right? You brother at the back.
What happens when these oppressed people, let's say they become the majority eventually, don't they become the oppressed?
the oppressors eventually?
Critical race theory, feminism, neo-Marxist feminism, queer theorists, gender theorists, all these people, they don't care to think about what would happen if, let's say, if the majority of people were queer, the majority of people were women, the majority of people were of a minority, Latino, Black, Asian, what have you. They don't care so much about that, because then the problem would disappear, and that's their job is done and they can retire, right? But so they don't have a plan for what that future would look like, or how to prevent oppression. But it could be argued, because they're materialists, and some have said that even if they were to get into a position of power and to oppress, because they've been oppressed for 400 years in the past, there would have to be an equal amount of oppression from them to balance things out. The majority don't say that though, but one or two do. But as I said, everyone's got some more wacky radical elements amongst them, right? So that doesn't represent the majority of them at all. Just one second, let me just finish and then we'll go. Okay, so as I mentioned, that they have suspicion about social relations. They say social relations are oppressive relations. This is similar to what I mentioned about what feminists said yesterday. That feminists will say the same thing about how women are treated. Islam, we reject standpoint epistemology. We say if people were given in accordance with their claims, men would claim the wealth and lives of other people, rather the burden of proof is upon the claimant. You must insist for evidence. Okay? You can't simply say, well, someone feels like it. No, we need evidence before we act. Right? It's as simple as. Now, that's different from saying that, because people say, for example, the feminists will say women should be listened to and believed, right? So no, what the court of law requires is that women or anyone should be listened to, and their testimony checked, right? But same with men. You need a legal system that does that. But they'll say, in this, the legal system is structurally sexist because in the majority of rape cases, it's hard to prove because it's the man's testimony versus the woman's testimony. So that means that the majority of rapists get away. And what we'd say, well, that's because you guys, you allow zina, you allow alcohol, you allow seclusion. This happens. If you're going to create that society that allows that, it's going to happen because they are crazy, they are criminals, and if you give criminals opportunity, they're going to take it. Yeah. So Islam, we would prevent those things from happening in the first place. No, that goes against our liberal and socialist values. No. It's not the rights we give people. It's not the freedoms. The problem is that the law is structurally sexist, because if it wasn't sexist, then the majority of rapists would be punished. That's exactly how they argue. And I even counted one individual on, it's only one individual on Twitter. It doesn't represent all feminists, of course. Hashtag not all feminists. But she said, if innocent men need to go to prison for 20 years to for justice for rape victims, so be it. Okay? But what does Islam say? Right? It's better. The Prophet Muhammad said, to paraphrase, better a criminal go free than an innocent person be punished. Okay? And so we would disagree with that. Yeah? But how do you solve the problem of rape? Well, Islam has solutions. Yeah? Our dawah should be that maybe you shouldn't allow zina, alcohol, and seclusion. Maybe, you know what's funny? There was this atheist guy. I'm not going to mention names, right? But there's an atheist guy. He comes to debate with Muslims, against Muslims, and he's very arrogant. So the classroom is like segregated. But because Muslim women are going on one side and Muslim men go on the other side, right? But he starts to accuse the organizers of mandating gender segregation when they didn't. There were non-Muslims mixing in the middle and all over the place. So he says, I'm going to leave this debate unless it's not segregated. And the organizers say, look, we're not telling people where to sit. Okay, he's making a big hullabaloo about this. A couple of years later, about 10 to 15 women testify that in atheist conferences that he attended, he's been groping them. Yeah, maybe that's why he was angry about gender segregation. It's like, I can't get my grope in. You're cramping my style, you Muslims. All right, so we would say, yeah, we want to eliminate the majority of rapes that happen too. How about prevention is better than cure, right? Let's prevent it. Yeah, all for that. Yeah, you liberals and socialists, you can't prevent it because you want to give people the right to be put in situations whereby criminals have opportunity to get away with it. We focus on prevention, right? Okay. As I mentioned yesterday, Islam is against the doctrine of suspicion. The Prophet Muhammad said, beware of suspicion, for suspicion is the worst of false tales. And many verses of the Quran that say the same thing, making negative assumptions. The Neo-Marxist is filled with suspicion and filled with reinterpreting your actions. Whereas in Islam, the actions, we must judge on the zahir. We judge on the apparent. Right? You can only judge on the apparent. You can't judge by people's hearts. Yeah? It's interesting, these neo-Marxists, they'll say, you can't, we can tell what your intent is, but if someone says, well, I think you believe in kufr ideas, oh, how dare you judge my heart? It's like, okay, right. Microaggressions. Sometimes they'll argue that speaking the truth to them is a microaggression. They'll say, telling us that you need evidence, or even refuting us. This is a microaggression. You're denying my humanity. As I mentioned in the feminism discussion yesterday, if you see at the bottom of the quote, it says that gender oppression is the process that limits or prohibits one's freedom, dignity, or subjectivity. Yeah, meaning your opinion. So if someone doesn't agree with your opinion and disputes it or questions you about it, they are limiting your subjectivity. They're limiting the value of your opinion by not embracing it unilaterally, right? So it's viewed as oppression to not accept what they blindly tell you. D'Angelo, again, a critical race theorist scholar, although some people follow critical race theory have this love-hate relationship with her because they love her stuff, they use this, white fragility, they use this as a concept, but she's a white woman. So they both say that she's not a critical race theorist, but then they use white fragility as an argument, I've documented that. Anyway, I've seen that at least once. So they would argue that if you accuse someone of being racist, let's say you accuse a white person or anyone of being racist, and let's say they're not racist, but of course if they're not racist, but they react angrily, or they don't or to be upset, like don't accuse me of being racist, they say, oh, that's your white fragility. It's just a defense mechanism because you are racist and you don't know what to say, so that's why you're being angry about it. You read it, it's there. Right? And you being angry about being called a racist is deliberately so to reinforce the racial hierarchy. You're reinforcing the racial oppression. So even being angry, if you get called a racist, you should just accept and go, yes, I'm racist. I'm sexist. I'm homophobic. I'm disablist, whatever, ableist, sorry. You have to accept those things. If you don't, and you react, you're reinforcing the oppression and reinforcing, you're reinstating the racial equilibrium. Now, we're about to finish, but basically, if anyone thinks that they can just be a critical race theorist and they don't have to agree with queer theory, for example, let's just say, that can't happen. Why? Because the same principles that are used to condemn racism, right? The same that no human being should be discriminated based on an attribute they have. Yes? Well, your sexual orientation is an attribute, according to the same neo-Marxist, and therefore you have to also be against heteronormative oppression or supremacy. Right, or phallocentrism. You have to be against anyone who believes or argues that different sex relationships is the norm. Right, because you're now discriminating against someone who doesn't feel that way or doesn't believe that, and you're marginalizing them, and you're oppressing them by saying that's not normal. right? For the same reason that you couldn't say white people can, but the white attribute, you can't say that white attribute is the norm and, what have you, right? So that's their basis for their judgment on these arguments, right? As a Muslim, some people don't realize, they see no problem with adopting the general principle, and then they are forced to be consistent with that principle, and then they have to say that they have to criticize heteronormativity as well, okay? Whereas as Muslims, we'd simply say that the creator of the universe, we're equal initially in front of the eyes of the creator, because the creator of the universe considered us to be of equal value in his eyes when we are initially created. Of course, those of you who are righteous, you rise up in that value. Yeah? But if you do, as Muslims, we believe that same-sex intercourse is a sin. So if you do that, then you go down in value, because this is against his prohibitions. That's our usul. That's our basis. Right? And of course, if someone has kibr, if you think you're better than another human being because you've got, I don't know, they're ginger or something, or you don't, whatever, you think they're better than them, then this is kibr, and this makes you go all the way down, in value, because this is haram. This is, some people say kibr is a kind of shirk as well, or it's close to shirk. Yeah, associating partners to God, because like you didn't make yourself. To think yourself better than another creation of God, which is like you, or the same state, then are you now divine or something? So some people say that's almost like a type of shirk. So that's why we would condemn kibr and asabiyya, right? Forming factions based on an attribute, same tribe, same language, same whatever you, forming a tribe and defending that group, whether it is just or not just to defend it. But that's different from ummah. Right? Ummah is a family understanding, and with us as an ummah, yes, we care for our family, our fellow Muslim brothers and sisters, but if a Muslim is doing injustice, we don't defend them for doing injustice. We don't defend them no matter what. Yeah? We prevent them from doing injustice, right? And we defend them against injustice. So that's the difference with Islam and Asabiyya. Okay, so what is the Islamic response of humanity? For humanity, humanity isn't classified by oppressor and oppressed, but believer in truth and disbeliever, in those who disbelieve in truth. All humans can oppress if given the motivation and opportunity. All humans. So how is giving everybody power, how is empowering everyone going to solve this? It's like the NRA saying, which they do, we can stop school shooting if everyone has guns. Give everybody guns. What's the worst that could happen? Right? Yeah. Well, if you give everybody a gun, then it's not going to stop the shooting, it's going to increase the shooting, basically. Giving everybody power, and I'm not saying there should be unequal power, I'm simply saying that thinking that is the solution when humans are the oppressors. Right? Whether you're male, female, black, white, heteronormative or whatever you want to call it, ableist, disabled, whatever you want to call, right? Anyone and everyone can be the oppressor, right? They just need the opportunity and motivation to do so. But anyone can, and anyone can be motivated to do so for a variety of reasons, right?
But by this word oppressor, volumun,
yeah.
Children of Israel are frequently referred to as Antum Zalimun, and you were the oppressors. So this classification of oppressor seems to be occurring in the Quran very frequently.
Yeah.
So
how do I respond to the fact that the Quran uses the term dhulm and dhalim? Well, what's the definition of dhulm in the Quran, Sunnah, right? It's you transgress the limits of who? Of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who transgress the limits of God. Then you commit dhulm. Right? And you transgress the limits of God, or you fail to give what is deserved to someone else. You do dhulm on them. Even if you're not harming them, you just don't give them what they are deserved from you, your obligation. You're not fulfilling your obligation to them. Dhulm. Right? This is how we define it. Right? So, as I said, in the Quran, I mentioned this yesterday, I'll say it again, which is if it's not about oppressed and oppressor, in the Quran it says, if only you could see what the wrongdoers will be detained before their Lord, throwing blame at each other. These are all wrongdoers, all wrongdoers. And who are these people? The lowly, those on the lower class, will say to the arrogant, those in the upper class, had it not been for you, we would certainly have been believers. And the arrogant will respond to the lowly, did we ever hinder you from guidance after it came to you? In fact, you were wicked. You're wicked as well, not just us. We were just on different parts of the boat, on top deck and bottom deck, but we were both going in the same sailing in the same ship, going in the same direction. Right? Yeah, that's in essence the counter argument. Okay, and then he said, the lowly will say to the arrogant, no, it was your plotting by day and night when you ordered us to disbelieve in Allah and to set up equals with Him, right? But they will all hide remorse when they see the torment, right? So they're all being punished. And here's the fascinating thing about this, right? Which is, so take the patriarchal, white supremacist, capitalist bourgeoisie class, okay, within the worldview of the Neo-Marxists. They believe in equality, right? But the Neo-Marxist says they don't follow it. Okay, they don't follow it. They believe in individualism. They just don't allow everyone to be fully individualistic or to be individual. The problem that the Neo-Marxists would say is that they're not the ruling classes are not letting the lower classes be sovereign over themselves truly and own themselves and do whatever they want, right? That's their complaint. But the reason why both of them are going to be punished is because while the ruling classes believed in equality and the individual can do whatever they want, all right, the lower classes wanted the same kufr, the same disbelief idea, the idea that the individual owns themselves, you're sovereign over yourself, there's nothing higher than yourself, right? The lower classes wanted the same kufr, they just were angry they didn't get it, didn't get to fully live it, right? So, subhanAllah, the Quran, I said the Quran has the best arguments. I've always said this. Also, the Quran says, O you who believe, be staunch in justice, witnesses for God, even though it be against yourselves or your parents or your kindred, whether a rich man or a poor man. Now, look at this, right? So, a critical race theorist and also a feminist, a neo-Marxist feminist would say this. When you ask what is sexism, what is racism, they won't say it just means discrimination of somebody or negatively or oppressing because of their race or gender. No. They'll say it is the instantiation of a set of power relations between those who have more power and those who have less power. And you might think, okay, why would they say that? Why is that important? Well, put very simply, is let's say, let's take for example, let's say a woman goes up to a man and says, all men are stupid and dumb and they should all be sent to a camp where they will be, where they'll only be asked to donate their genetic material, but otherwise remain in there for the rest of their lives. There was one crazy feminist that actually said that actually, but the radical one and a minority of course. And that's not sexist. Why? Because you can't oppress the oppressor, they say. You can be rude, insulting, and also you can be racist. You can say that, you can say all white people are evil. You can say that white people are the spawn of Satan. You can, depending on which hierarchy you're going to cite, you can say all Arab people are the spawn of Satan and evil. As long as you're in a classification or you're in a class that you would say is in an oppressed position vis-a-vis Arabs, for example, right? You could say that, and that wouldn't be racist. It's only racist if it comes from if you inhabit an oppressor group against an oppressed group. The Quran says not to insult each other or use nicknames or things like this. It doesn't matter whether you're oppressed or oppressor. That also goes against the Quran, what it says as well. Why? Because you as an individual are only responsible for your deeds, not for some oppressive group or class. But Neo-Marxism assigns collective blame, much like the Zionist regime, collective punishment for the Palestinians. Because one Palestinian shot a mortar or something like this, they all must be punished, right? So the Neo-Marxist thinks exactly like that. So they call it reverse racism and reverse sexism, and they say you can't be reverse racist and you can't be reverse sexist, and so on and so forth. Okay. And lastly, to finish off, what's the Islamic perspective then? Well, kibr and asabiya are not the product of structures of society. Iblis had kibr. Was he part of a socio-economic system where jinns were at the top and humans were at the bottom, and he was merely instantiating the oppressive group's power relations with the oppressed human group? No, he was not. But kibr spontaneously arises. Even you see amongst kids, just spontaneously amongst kids, between two siblings, say, "Oh, I beat you, I'm better than you," right? Yeah, it spontaneously arises because humans are fallible creatures and prone to very stupid assumptions and errors about themselves. Asabiya, forming groups randomly and being proud of those groups, it occurs spontaneously. When I was at university, I went to paintballing, right, with my university friends, and we were grouped. We were put into one big group. The organizers came around. They just said, red tag, blue tag, red tag, blue tag, red tag, blue tag. And suddenly, within maybe like a minute or two, it's like, red team's the best. We're the best. Like, you were all randomly assigned. You don't even know who else is on your team, and you're suddenly the best now because of you've got that little color banding on your arm. Okay. Guess what? Imagine that, but humans with ethnicity, what village you're from, what town, what tribe, or so on. You see my point, okay? But also, humans act upon suspicion against foreigners and foreign people they don't understand, or they don't know their motivations. They act suspiciously, and they don't trust. You don't trust people that you don't know, strangers, and you don't trust people, especially the people that look different from you. It's a naturally occurring, unfortunate problem that humans have if they're not guided by revelation. If they're not guided by revelation, yeah. There's a famous Arab proverb. I think any Arab will tell you: "Me against my brother, me and my brother against my cousin, me, my brother, my cousin against the stranger." Right? That's pretty much humans in Jahiliyyah, basically. So then, in the United States of America, who is the dominant group? It's not to say white people is an oversimplification. We all know who they are. They're Anglo-Saxons, basically, right? Because French speakers, they don't speak French, right? Heck, in Canada, where they haven't been able to force the French speakers to speak English, there is rancor, hatred even between the two. Okay, I once spoke on I say this quite often, but I was on a couple of years ago. I was on a plane, sitting next to some white Canadian guy, or European Canadian. And we just got talking. I'm quite sociable on the plane because I'm bored. So I started talking to people, and I started talking to him. And as we started talking, he starts saying things like, because I'm a British person. Here's my accent. I'm from England. He feels like he can open up to me because he feels he's oppressed in his country. He said, "I support Trump. I think he's a good leader, but my girlfriend she really disagrees with me on this, and I can't. And I'm so glad I can talk to you about this, because for me it was like a zoologist or something. Like you're going through the forest and you're just thinking, look at this animal. I'm just going to let the animal be as I'm not saying that Trump supports animals, by the way. I'm just simply saying that I was a passive observer. I was learning. I want to understand the thinking of this person, right? So I was just listening. Wasn't saying much. I just wanted to listen, and I was asking questions. Why do you say this? Why do you say this? Anyway. So he opened up to me, and then I asked him about French speakers and Canada and the domestic issues. And he was telling me quite interesting. He said that he's a Trump supporter, right? And he doesn't like immigration so much into Canada. But he says that he hates French speakers more than immigrants, basically, right? Yeah. Of course, critical race theory couldn't explain that, but the Islamic understanding of humans, the kibr and asabiya model, you could say, Ibn Khaldun discusses asabiya in quite depth and detail, how it affects people. But basically, asabiya is a dominate or be dominated type of concept. Okay? And in every country, especially nation states, where the state represents the nation, which nation? Yeah? Then there's a fight in that country. And it doesn't matter which country you go to. You want to go to Ethiopia, multiple ethnic groups fighting along ethnic lines, and they are racist. You want to go to Somalia. You think, oh, everyone's Somali there, right? Where would be the racism in Somalia? Well, against the Bantu Somalis, there's quite a lot of racism, actually, because Somalia was a place that had slaves. They were slavers, and they took non-Somali slaves, which are generally called Bantus, but they nicknamed them as Jarir, I believe. Correct me if any Somali here you can. Yeah, he's laughing because like he knows our secret. Quick, get him! Don't let him tell people, right? Yeah. And and the Bantu, and these are Muslims, by the way, who they're being racist against. They have more, you could say, typical sub-Saharan African features, more rounded noses. The hair is more tight to curls, and they are derogatorily insulted for these attributes, right? So. So, well, just come tomorrow. We can have some fun with that, with what's going to be discussed tomorrow about this topic. But anyway, is it because they have internalized whiteness that they view other Africa? No, they were like this beforehand. The racism has existed in the Muslim world and in every part of the world forever, right? Chinese, right? They don't like the Kwai Lo very much, do they? The foreigners down there. China's called the Middle Kingdom. Why? Because they're the center of the earth, and everyone around them is barbarians. Yeah, ancient Greeks. That's where we get the word barbarian from. All these foreigners sound the same to us. Yeah. Again and again and again, humans are racist, or you call it racist, but let's say asabiya and kibr. Asabiya and kibr all the time. Okay. Critical race theory doesn't understand that humans can spontaneously be evil, goes against the Enlightenment values, and especially goes against their Cartesian idea of that we are disembodied minds, and the mind is only corrupted by bad ideas, and in this case, bad ideas comes from bad material circumstances, the Marxist idea. But if you say no, it's not material circumstances, it's just humans. We're given opportunity and motivation, will be oppressors, will do bad things, will be racist, and they'll be racist to anyone else different from themselves. Okay? Like go to Japan, right? You might be a white Westerner, that doesn't get you very far in Japan. They don't go, oh, you're the superior race to us. No, you're the strange foreigner and weird, and and get out of the country in many cases, right? Yeah, don't care, right? They don't. In every country, the majority group think they're the best, right? They're the best, and everyone else are inferior, or strange, or weird, or what have you, right? More or less, right? Then someone said that there are instances where there was a black woman going to workplace in America, and there's been stories where they say that the people just touch their hair, like oh, you've got nice hair, and they just like starts grabbing and touching it. Yeah, that's weird and like ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, as in for that habit, because you're meant to be a professional workplace, not going to be touching people's hair. I would agree with that, but the motivation to do so, okay, is not a white thing. There's a documentary where someone goes into Papua New Guinea and also into Papua New Guinea, and the people there are obviously, they're not white, right? And they see a white person with straight blonde hair, and he's just coming to meet them, and they're like, oh, and they all start going around him and just touching his hair right in front of him, like, okay, guys, like, okay, he's not really expressing bother about it, but I would agree that it is ridiculous to do so in the office space. How do you touch people's hair in the office? Yeah, that is going over the limits. That is definitely going over the limits. But I'm simply saying, but the going over the limits in the office is the valid argument. But the motivation to touch people's hair when you're not used to that type of thing is a typical human thing that you see across the whole planet. Is my point. Okay, it's not necessarily racist, but touching your hair in an office, yeah, that's definitely a massive problem there. And yeah, racist, probably racist in that situation. So, Anyway, as Muslims, Islam has a solution to this, which is once we realize that we're all the one tribe, Bani Adam, and once we realize that as Muslims we can't revel in our lineage, our land, our nationality, and when the Prophet Muhammad said, undoubtedly Allah has removed from you the pride of arrogance of the age of Jahiliyyah and the glorification of ancestors. Now people are of two kinds, either believers who are aware or transgressors who do wrong. You are all children of Adam, and Adam was made of clay. People should give up their pride in nations, because that is a coal from the coals of hellfire. If they do not give this up, Allah will consider them lower than the lowly worm which pushes through khara, dung, right? Excrement, right? So that's the Islamic perspective. It's a human. We understand humans as they are. Okay, and we condemn what's called racism, but we have more specific and better descriptive terms for that: kibr and asabiyya. Right, and there's a few other Arabic words we can use for different other such things, but let's say kibr and asabiyya are the two main ones. So, brothers and sisters, if someone says to you that your mosque, your MSA, your business or company needs to institute anti-racism policies, be careful, because their definition of what is racism might not be according to Quran and Sunnah. If you say, well, look, I'm not anti-racist because I don't believe that humanity has multiple races within it. We are one race. I reject the social construct. Why are we going to fight against the social construct by reinforcing the social construct? Right? By the way, this is actually, the postmodernists have said the same thing as I've just said now. They noticed this as well. They say this is incorrect. A broken clock is right twice a day, so don't worry. But the postmodernists. So simply, brothers and sisters, you say, you know what? No, I'm Muslim. I'm going to implement anti-kibr and anti-asabiyya policies. Right, from the Quran and Sunnah. I'm going to implement that. We're going to tell Muslims, if we encounter any Muslims that demonstrate kibr or demonstrate asabiyya, we're going to warn them that they are upon jahiliyyah and they could be from the coals of hell. This is the coals of hellfire. Yeah? Right? And, it's in Jahannam, everyone's all one color, burnt. Yeah? So if anyone wants to have kibr and asabiyya, they should avoid, and they care about not being burnt. They should avoid those things that send them to such a place. Barakallahu feekum, brothers and sisters. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions, contentions, and comments, inshallah. I'm going to just. By the way, just to add to a point that this is actually a point of good dawah for Muslims to do, that Islam has the means within it to implement the solution to kibr al-asabiyya globally. Even though we ourselves represent perhaps the least best example of eliminating kibr al-asabiyya amongst ourselves, but that's only because we don't implement Islam and because we don't want to implement Islam, to be honest, right? Yeah, that's a more shocking thing to say. Because if I tell people unity, let's unite, and they say, oh, but how can we unite with the Ash'ari and the Maturidis and the Turks and what have you, and the Arabs and what have you, and I say, well then you disbelieve in the verse of the Quran that says that do not be divided amongst yourselves. So, I don't disbelieve in the verse. Well, if Allah says do not be divided amongst yourselves, and you're justifying to me why we should be divided, then is that not disbelief in that verse? Right? Then you don't believe in it. Yeah? So as Muslims, we are the least, unfortunately, representative of the Islamic goals, unfortunately, I'd say, arguably. But we actually do possess the solution to it. The solution. Because, as I said, without revelation, the mentality of Jahiliyyah, it will be, kibr and asabiyya will naturally arise in Jahiliyyah. It naturally arises. Right? If you're a materialist, why can't you say you're superior to other people? If you're a genius and someone else is not a genius, and you're a materialist, you'd say, well, yeah, I am superior to these plebeians, right? So why wouldn't a materialist say that? Yeah, that's why materialists, in a way, invented the kind of modern racism. You can understand the idea of racial superiority. They invented it because what's one set of atoms compared to another set of atoms? You just make any arbitrary criteria and say you're better. Yeah, so of course they said it, but as Muslims we have a basis, we know revelation shows us our cosmic place. Right? Anyway, contentions, questions, I always give privilege. I give privilege to the contention class, the class of people in this university, which have contentions with me, right? An ever-growing class, no doubt. But I'll give this oppressed class privilege to contend with me and voice your disagreement. So if anyone disagrees with anything I've said, maybe have I misrepresented critical race theory? If I've studied it for 8 years, but did I miss something in my studies, perhaps? Yeah, please tell me. I'd like to know. So have I misrepresented it? Have I lied about it? Am I ignorant? Have I not given enough evidences? Please, anyone disagrees with me on anything I say, please go ahead. I'll give. Now, before what happens is I ask even for contention before I see questions and answers. But unfortunately, the contention session goes on quite long as everyone's got contentions. So I will give one contention, and then 1 or 2 questions, then another contention. We'll mix it up a bit, okay? So does anyone have any disagreements with me on anything? No? Is that a hand up? Oh no, they're just eating. Okay, yes. No? Okay, questions then. Right, you brother.
I missed the beginning, so can you quickly sum up what critical theory, race theory means? Because I've always tried to understand it when it popped up in the news when they were trying to teach it in the US.
Yes.
So I always tried to understand, but I really never understood the meaning.
Okay, so critical race theory is a theory, a neo-Marxist theory, and what makes it neo-Marxist is they argue that racism is part of the structure of society, and by structure they mean it is part of the ideology, the culture. It is embedded in the law and in the ideas, both conscious and unconscious, of the people of a society. So it comes from people believing it as a set of concepts, and it also it being present and kind of permeating the legal system and the institutions and so on and so forth. In this kind of ghostly ether, it's permeating these things, and it emerges from this as this ether called the structure. Okay, that is a neo-Marxist applying it to race, or a critical race theorist, basically.
So it's because of the differences in the classes. That's what causes the racism. They're saying, not because the person is evil, right? That's what you're trying to.
They'll say the differences in power between the classes is the reason for why the entire structure is racist, because of the unequal power balance, and the unequal power balance causes those who don't have the power as much to be oppressed, and because they are subjugated to those who have more power over them. Yes.
I have a related question to that.
Sure.
If I'm correct, the ones who were advocating for this were liberals, right? In the U.S., not the conservative Republicans. They were Democrats.
They were advocating for what? Sorry.
Critical race.
No, the liberals don't believe in critical race theory.
The Democrats aren't liberals?
The Democrats are a mix of liberals and socialists, Marxists, neo-Marxists. They're a mix. So again, that's where we generalize what people are and what people do. So yeah, they're a mixed bag basically. Okay. Yeah, you brother.
So you talked about how getting together within factions to fight the other race or whatever is not, shouldn't be done, right? It's from Islamically. So kind of just to in a practical example, for example, you talked about in the 17th century in the English colonies you had the Europeans and you had the slaves. So in this situation, if you're, let's say, a slave, what do you do? You're just stuck in this situation. Here's a situation where I'm just trying to imagine the other, obviously the slaves, maybe they don't want to be slaves, right? Obviously whatever pain, torture, whatever.
Yeah.
So how do you go about it? And then obviously this is a kind of extreme example, right? But I guess you could apply it into like other areas as well.
You're saying if you're living in the 17th or 18th century colonies, and you're a slave on the colonies, should you not unite with other slaves to uprise against the slave owners?
Have to do an uprising, but I'm just asking, like.
Well, you couldn't form a political campaigning class if you're a slave, because you're a slave. They're gonna kill you or whip you or whatever. You gotta say, well, I'm not gonna uprise against you, but we're gonna form a political lobby which will, like, you're not even be allowed out of the plantation. It's not so unless you're uprising, there's nothing else you can do. You're escaping or uprising. One of the two things. You can only do those two things, right? But, well, yeah, if you want to be Spartacus, he was a Roman gladiatorial slave, and he uprose against the Romans and led. Okay, it didn't work out so well eventually for them, but the slaves back then were multi-ethnic, right? There was no idea of racial slavery or slavery that should be taken from one race. But that being said, it's not like the Europeans went to a market and go, well, why don't we buy the white slaves? They're a bit more pricier, but let's buy the white slaves. No, for them, West Africa was selling, so they bought. Okay, everyone forgets that. What was that film came out? What was it, Woman King or something like this? You know what I'm talking about? Bit of controversy around that, wasn't it? Because the Dahomey were some of the worst slavers in West Africa. And they didn't just enslave their fellow compatriots in the region. They did gratuitous violence that didn't even need to be done. You caught the people. You don't have to kill all the survivors, or just gratuitously randomly kill people, just for fun. But they did. So you want to make a movie about them? They're slavers. They're the suppliers to the European powers. Of course, people talk about. So the ancient world is different. Racial slavery was something concocted by. It was concocted by liberals to justify why their universal values. There should be an exception for their universal values. Before that, people who didn't believe in universal values, or at least they thought Christians thought values for Christians and don't care about non-Christians. But liberals thought that all humans, deserved the rights they were talking about. But maybe not those guys, because we want to benefit from slavery, so not them. Although John Locke made an argument, he said that slavery, he didn't care about race. We didn't mention race. He simply said in his second treatise of government. He mentioned race elsewhere, but not in that book. He simply said that if anyone's enslaved, you can buy them and you can use them. So, slavery is valid to be done. If that's their initial condition. But he said, if that's their condition because they fought in a war and they were due to be killed because they fought in a war, but instead the captors decided to spare them when they could have been killed. So it's not like I own your life now because I could just kill you, right? That would have been what you deserve, but I'm not going to kill you. So I'm going to stay killing you if you just work, right? So John Locke argued that was fine, right? So he used that logic to justify. He didn't use race-based logics, at least in that book, his second treatise of government. But in the medieval world, ancient world, slavery was equal opportunities, right? From any ethnicity, as long as maybe it's not your own city's ethnicity, but Spartans would regularly make slaves of their fellow Greeks all the time, actually, and Athenians too, with those they could capture. The Muslim world, again, they enslaved loads of Europeans. North Africans made an industry of enslaving Europeans, actually, and selling them in the markets of North Africa. Somalis were slavers of Bantus and others, East Africans. But you see, here's the fascinating thing. Unlike what happened in Europe, whereby in America, because they didn't want to marry, they didn't want to have intermarriage, they had laws against intermarriage and to keep everyone separate, so that it prevents some kind of takeover by a people that is a different nation to themselves, as opposed to be how the Anglo-Saxons viewed it. In the Muslim world, people basically, like slaves, they had a huge influx of slaves, but where were the slaves going? Because like we don't see of multi-generational slaves where like someone says, my father was a slave, my grandfather was a slave, my great-great-grandfather was a slave. Where were they disappearing off to? If you do genetic tests, right, a lot of Arabs and others, they have a high degree of, let's just say, African genes in themselves. Why? Because they basically freed them and intermarried them. But when you do that, you need new slaves then, because the slaves have become free and you've married them and you had children with them. You need new ones. So the Europeans were shocked because they knew that the Muslims had high turnovers of slaves, but like, they couldn't see them anywhere. There wasn't that many. It's like there was meant to be like a massive, in the plantations in North America, there's like tons of them. Where are your slaves? I only see a few guys, a few people. Right? What happened to them? Yeah, well, like, oh, you mean my grandma, that kind of thing, That would be the case. Yeah. So it was different. It wasn't race-based per se, but it didn't mean that they weren't beliefs by some Arabs who thought that Arabs were the best. And so let me put into perspective here, just so you understand. So Ibn Khaldun, he followed the kind of the climate theory of human temperament, that the humans resemble the climate they live in. Okay, it was popular back then. So he explained that people often say, oh, Ibn Khaldun is anti-black racist. Why? Because he says that those people in far deep Africa, below the Sahara Desert, they are like closer to savages and animals and things like that, right? Because they have extreme climate on them, yeah? And I say, yeah, but, and that's wrong, of course, but he also said that white people, Slavs, all the way up in the cold north, were also animalistic and close to animals and slaves because they lived under the extreme climate of coldness. But he said that, those who are Ethiopians and Arabs and so on, they are part of the civilized peoples, yeah? So what does that tell you? It tells you that everyone thinks that their race is the center of the world and everyone else are barbarians. That's what it tells you, basically. The further out you are from that central group, the more barbaric you are, basically. That's just common. But the critical race theory makes it some kind of cosmic story that it was only the white people that did this, and the reason why that everyone around the world is racist today is only because of colonialism, because white people told people to be racist. So, are you sure? Because I pretty much don't think that's the case, historically speaking, and people have been pretty racist for centuries. Anyway, so yeah, I hope that answers your general question about the origin of Kibr and Asabiya is humans, is Jahiliyyah, right? Sorry, it's not the human mind given being taught bad ideas, the human mind making assumptions of its own accord, yeah? Iblis, the first person who manifested Kibr, as far as we know anyway, there was no society that gave him that. He wasn't given structural racism by a society of jinns, against humans, right? He was an individual. He hated humans because he thought he was made of fire, and or some fieriness, and humans are made of earth, and he used that as an excuse to assume that he's better than them. Okay, so yeah. Of course, as I said, Neo-Marxism thinks, and post-structuralism or postmodernism thinks that language was made by society, was socially constructed. Well, explain Adam alayhi salam's language then, that it was taught by, he learned language and had aql before there was even a second human being around. So explain that one. Yeah. So this is not our model of understanding human beings. This is not how we understand human beings. And the Islamic model explains human behavior much better. So if you take it as a theory, it explains all the data points much more consistently with no gymnastics it's the most frugal explanation. So use Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is the best, right? So that would be our argument. Okay, don't accept the neo-Marxist rubbish, basically. And yeah, you don't need to fight up by making a class faction. As Muslims, we're here to stand for justice and be witnesses to mankind. The only class faction that's fighting is those upon the truth against those who are not upon the truth. Mainly because if you're not upon the truth, you won't know what to fight for anyway. So of course, by necessity, the class faction has to be those people who believe the truth, because they're the only ones who know what to do, correctly. Anyway, any other comments, contentions, or no from this side? Okay, so brother at the back.
How do you respond to people who argue about feminism
How can you convince them without talking about Islam? Because when you talk about Islam, they say, okay, you're just Muslim and that's what you do.
Yeah.
How can you convince us because you're just Muslim?
Okay, so how do we convince non-Muslims? So this week, like in 3 weeks' time, we have obviously Islam Awareness Week, and this week, as my colleague Ahmed has mentioned, is Kufr Awareness Week. All right, so awareness of Kufr, of disbelief. This is primarily designed for Muslims, because Kafirs know about Kufr already, because they follow it. Right? Whereas most Muslims are not meant. We're not meant to have that awareness by following it, but some do, unfortunately. And you need to know how to explain that what they're following is not Islamic, because they'll say they won't see any problem with it because their knowledge of Islam is not that deep, or their knowledge of these theories are not that deep, and they don't see the problem with it. So they'll happily call other Muslims, and they'll use racial insults, quote unquote, against other Muslims, and they'll justify it by saying it's okay because they're the oppressor class and we're the oppressed. I say, so I thought we were all part of the Ummah. Like they'll say, oh yeah, but just because we're part of the Ummah doesn't mean that Muslims can't be bad to each other. I say, yeah, I know that, but we're meant to be better than the Dhalimeen. We don't join the Dhalimeen in a game of dhulm. We don't join the game, and just say, okay, well, I'll fight back against you with counter dhulm. It's like, I'm sorry, that's not how we work as Muslims. So but as for debating non-Muslims, there's a problem, which is your starting basis. Okay, you have to start from a basis, not just the initial ideas they talk about, but you have to start from their aqidah, attack their aqidah first. And the first thing you attack is basically individualism, the idea that the individual owns themselves, that we made ourselves, we didn't make ourselves, but that we somehow have sovereignty over ourselves. If you destroy that basis, if you say that there's no possible idea of good and bad, other than purpose of life and the creator and so on and so forth, then everything built, right? Everything built on that top idea, you destroy that top idea, everything that's attached to it falls down. You snip it, and it all falls down, basically. Right? But of course, you can debate critical race theorists and mention, please explain in South Africa why South Africans are racist against Mozambicans, even though they're not visually diverse or significantly, or there's not much diversity in terms of the physical appearance phenotype, right? But one is Portuguese speakers, other one's obviously English and regional language speakers, like Xhosa, it has a little click in it. It's Xhosa. It's a regional language, and Zulu. So. How do you explain that? Well, the critical race theory, and I've heard one of them say that due to white colonialism, the black South Africans have internalized whiteness ideas that makes them treat Africans as the white people viewed Africans to be. So they're self-hating Africans, and so they see fellow black Africans through the lens of whiteness. It's so the mental gymnastics they use to make it a universal way to explain racism is so ridiculous that it just doesn't. You just have to try to point it out and hope that they're sincere enough to accept that. The Islamic perspective explains all instances around the world of it simply and beautifully. You can say that it's a simpler explanation, makes more sense. Humans are racist. Spontaneously, the Jahil humans spontaneously generate what you call racism, kibr al-sabiyya, spontaneously. So heck, not even humans, even jinn. Right? So that's the way to argue. But like as I said, it's like let's say you have a debate on LGBT same-sex marriage, okay? So the debate is not whether it should be legal in America, what have you, because you say, well, whatever non-Muslims do amongst themselves is not our concern, but we will merely bear witness to what is the moral value of these things and what shouldn't be done. But we don't participate in the internal politics which is based on kufr concepts, right? So we just simply advise, we say, this is not what the Creator intends for us to do, and that's all we say. But if you were to engage a debate and say that, I don't think same-sex marriage is a same-sex family under a contract of marriage is morally equivalent to a opposite-sex marriage, family, and so on and so forth. What basis would you have to debate with that person and say, well, why are you saying that for? I think they're the same. I think they both are marrying based on their sexual preferences. So there's consistency in my view. They'll say. You say, well. What would you argue against them? Well, you'd have to say, well, look, I'll tell you what. Do you believe that it is wrong to sleep with someone without their consent? I say yes. Okay. Why is that? Well, because it's not you don't own them. You don't own their body, so you can't make them do stuff against their consent because they're the ones who own themselves. I say, okay, no, I agree. It is wrong to sleep with someone against the consent of the one who owns the body. I agree with that. Who made the body? Right? And you see where I'm going with this, right? That's how we argue. We attack the Aqidah issue first. I mean, you can argue bits and bobs with them about, like, if their theory predicts something and it doesn't happen, you could say your theory is wrong then because it doesn't predict, it makes bad predictions and things like that. Although they can use mental gymnastics to say, well, actually, the reason for this is because there's, whatever. But ultimately, you have to attack the Aqidah first. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to attack anything else that they say. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Questions, comments, contentions?
Going back to what you mentioned about that analogy with the race, sorry, the wrong word to use right now, but like the race with two people, one person, the gun fires, starts running, but the other person is held back from it.
Yeah.
Right? And so if we acknowledge that, I don't know if you did, I may have missed it while filming, if we acknowledge that to be a reality, that for some people maybe there is this disparity due to previous circumstances or things that happen.
Yeah.
What is the Islamic solution to that, and how do we address that as Muslims?
Okay, so but that's a very good question. So because African Americans were started out with a worse condition than obviously European Americans, white people as you call them, then isn't that unfair? And of course, they're always going to be on the back foot, or they're always going to be behind because the others started out further ahead, and it's not like everyone started out with the same circumstances. And of course, why do you get police officers more likely to shoot a black person than shoot a white person, so on and so forth? Why does that happen, right? So the Neo-Marxists would say it's because of structural racism that makes the white officers reinforce the oppression of black people and perpetuate the supremacy of whites by basically being more willing to shoot black people and so on and so forth. And we would say a more simpler argument, which is it's just as bad, the effect that's happened, but let's find an explanation that makes more sense. And let's just give you an example from India. Okay, right? So India, right? Muslims and Hindus, arguably Hinduism is a social construct, but anyway, but by the British, by the way, right? So a British construct. Anyway, okay, the ideas predate British, but as a group of people, and that was one group, one religion, not multiple religions. You can thank the British for that. Okay, so a Muslim arrested by the Indian police is going to get a worse time than a Hindu arrested by the Indian police, and they're probably going to end up being more likely to be killed, beaten, tortured, what have you, right? More likely. But ethnically, the Muslim is from the same ethnic groups as the Hindu, because there's multiple ethnic groups in India, for those who don't know. And Muslims are from the same ethnic groups as all the other fellow Indians from that area. Okay, so then how does that explain it? Right? Structural racism, whiteness? No, I can't explain it because Well, the CRT people might say, well, they were colonized by the British, and so the Hindus have internalized whiteness, and they view the but like against Muslims, they felt like how you even explain it? So like because the British look down upon all of them equally, you know. So I don't like you know, where are you getting this stuff from? So they can't explain it properly. We'd explain it very, very simply. They view their group. They have asabiya for their group. They say that they can trust the intentions of if they encounter an unknown man on the street who's Hindu, they can say that the police officer psychologically would think, I can trust that person a bit more because I know their mindset better, right? Because they follow my mindset, so I can approach them in a certain way. I know I can trust them more because I know that they have the similar mindset to myself. They have the same subculture as myself within India, which is basically religion in that case. And they look similar to me. Well, not everyone has a tilak on their head, but anyway, they don't have the kufi and the jalabiya and that kind of stuff, right? That looks different to me. That creates an air of unknown, of a chaotic air of unknownness. Like, what could they do, right? So in such circumstances, of course, and the fact that they view that Muslims could be dangerous because they say, well, you know, Muslims are more likely to be criminals because they're the minority and they don't get much opportunities. Statistically, more Muslims will engage in criminality than the majority because they lack opportunities and many other such things, and they're looked down upon and yada yada yada. So they're going to most likely shoot first 2 Muslims in India. Okay. And that same mental processes will go through the the European American police officer's head when he encounters African Americans in America, mindsets and so on and so forth, what have you. But here's the thing. Now this is a TikTok anecdote, so I don't know if it's true or not, but it was shared to me. So there was a black British man went to America. Again, the police officer looks at him in a dodgy, funny way, thinks that he's going to up to no good, so approaches him and like starts to talk to him like, what are you doing here, what have you. So he starts speaking with his British accent and say, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from England. Oh, sorry, I thought you were black. And then walked off. He's black, right? Yeah, because in America, black is an African American. Yeah, not a black person, but an African American with the African American subculture or subcultures and mindsets and so on. So it's a perspective, not perspective. Sorry, all the stereotypes associated with it in the minds of the European Americans, so on and so forth. It's that category, right? But it doesn't apply to maybe. An African individual who comes over, first generation African individual who has a different mindset, right? Would not be viewed in the same category, right? And likewise, a British black person comes over to America, won't be viewed in the same category because they're different cultural mindset, different stereotype, what have you, right? Now here's the thing. Now the Quran says that Allah made us into nations and tribes that we may recognize each other, right? Just to put that aside for one moment, okay? Because the problem is that if you have a negative stereotype about, if you don't trust people because they look different from you, or they act different, or they have a different subculture to yourself, then you're going to react against them in a negative way, assuming the possibility of the worst. Okay? That happens in any culture, any nation, and so on and so forth. Islam has a solution to this. Yeah? I can meet any Muslim from any background, and when I know that they're Muslim, I feel assured, you know, that I have some basis with them. I have a common set of principles. I know their interests, right? So they're no longer a stranger to me, right? They're no longer unknown. And that Islam can solve the problems of asabiyyah in the West, right? But they can't solve. They can never solve it. No matter how liberal you are, you're always going to think that someone who doesn't look like you or looks different from you and has a different culture to yourself or religion or whatever you, there's something you can't trust about them. And it wasn't just with African Americans, it's with Catholics in America. There was a view that Catholics are going to take over and make Americans under the Pope for some reason. There was Of course, there was fear of Jews as well, because they have different practices and rituals to Europeans, and they looked very distinct. There was a point in time where almost every country in Europe was majoritarily anti-Jewish, had anti-Jewish view of them, not because Jews did anything bad per se, more than anyone else, but because they had different customs and cultures, and they had different dress and everything. They look very different. Okay, so as Muslims, we can explain and offer solutions to this, right? Which is when I know that my brothers and sisters are Muslim, it don't matter that when I see them looking different from me, I'm now intrigued. Oh, what is this fashion you're wearing? Or what's this? What is it? Is this called a pakoda? Oh, okay, can I try it? It seems very nice. Yeah, now it turns it around. It's now not strange to me anymore, right? And now my family, I just have a really big family. But don't expect Eid cards, okay? Right? So anyway, I'll group message you or something on WhatsApp. Anyway, I'll do it on the UBC one. I heard it's quite a good place for mass messages. Right. So Islam has a solution, yeah? It changes the innate fear you have of the stranger, right? To if they're Muslim, that they basically then you can, that your family, and even in an Islamic system where those people who are not Muslim, okay, but the society, the peace and the justice of society is guaranteed by the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we still are, we're still assured because we live in a system whereby the justice of Allah reigns, right? And we have faith that Allah's justice will obviously prevail. And of course, the Prophet Muhammad prevented us from oppressing the dhimmi, right? So if we said those who harm a dhimmi has harmed him, has the Prophet Muhammad himself. So we don't want to harm the Prophet Muhammad. So even then, the minorities are protected from us. Because it's equivalent to harming the Prophet Muhammad, harming them, right? The white American police officer does not have that motivation. The white American police officer will simply say, do I want to trust an individual that looks different from me and of whom I've heard a bad stereotype about, or about crime, there's more crime statistics, that could prevent me from going back home to my kids by me going in a body bag, or should I just shoot first? Yeah, you're going to get them doing that then, right? It's not justified, it's bad, but this is the problem of Jahiliyyah. They don't have a solution. They are stuck in their ignorance, their suspicion of each other, their hatred of each other. They don't see a reason to unite with each other. A liberal might just say, I wish we could all live as one big human family. It's all nice and airy-fairy. But because they believe in nation states, where the state represents a culture or what have you, and there's always going to be a fight of whose culture determines the state. And is it my culture that is on top, or someone else's culture on top where I might be the oppressed? Yeah, there's always that worry and suspicion. Isn't it from far right or right wing or conservatives? Isn't that what they always say? They're worried about high levels of immigration because that might mean that they become the oppressed. Isn't that what they say all the time? Yeah, liberals have no solution to that. They can't argue. They say, look, but if the law guarantees that we can all do what we want anyway, who cares who the majority is? Right? The liberal's very naive. Yeah, the conservative, because they think that will persuade the conservatives. It doesn't. Yeah, and of course. As anyone who studies history will know, that liberalism collapses into fascism. It yo-yos from fascism to liberalism, like Spain, Portugal, Italy, okay, Germany we all know, Mexico, everyone forgets them, and Japan. Very liberal regimes until they became fascist and very xenophobic. Before, very open, then very xenophobic. Okay, because liberalism can't resolve this problem amongst the problem of Jahiliyyah, of Jahil nature, the nature of the human being in Jahiliyyah. It's a recurring problem. They can't solve it. We can solve that problem. That's our basis for dawah. Yeah. Any questions on this side? So I could keep looking this side. Anyone? No. No. Okay. Then you brother over there.
I have I don't like something you said. I'm not sure if I understood it correctly.
Sure.
But personally, I don't think there's a problem with taking into account statistics. Because let's say...
Oh, you weren't here at the beginning, right?
No.
Okay, let me just... yeah, just read that. Okay. Question answered, really, isn't it? Good. All right, there you go. All right, so that's why I made it as one of my first slides, that we're not debating how prevalent racism is. We're not going to debate the statistics. We're not going to debate that a disproportionate number of African Americans will go to jail for the same crimes and for longer jail sentences than their white co-citizens. Yeah, no debate on that. The stats are quite clear. Yeah. We're not here to debate those things. We're here to explain those things, right? And to say that the critical race theory has no explanation, has no good explanation for those things. Just so you know, the conservatives hate critical race theory. Liberals do too, but they're less vocal about it because liberals, they want to make minorities feel. Because social liberals want minorities to feel they have equal opportunities, so they'll dispute it less, right? But a conservative will, because a conservative thinks that their society is a utopia, or at least the best that humans can get. And the conservative views that the critical race theory incites race asabiya, right? Race consciousness and fighting and what have you, not physical fighting necessarily, but just separation, division on race. And the conservative hopes that people wouldn't make race a thing, okay? And the critical race theory says back to them, or the critical race theory says back to them, but your color blindness makes you unable to see the racism in society for what it is. And to an extent, they both are right about each other, yeah? To an extent, they're both right about each other. The conservative believes too much in the system, that he can't see that the system itself can't solve racism, is really what's happening.
You know, I think I need to clarify my question more.
Okay.
Because this is, I know this is correct, but this is not what I wanted to ask.
Well,
like, my point is about suspicion.
Yeah.
So I don't think, you correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but I don't think there's a problem with being suspicious about a certain ethnicity or something if there's statistical reason to. Like, for example, last year I was trying to be like open-minded and stuff like that and not be suspicious because I was from Canada and stuff like that. So I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was an Indian. It was an Indian person.
Yeah.
Very clear Indian accent. Told me his name. He gave me a white
His name was John.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
A white name, and he told me.
Why? What? You think that Indian can't be called John? Racists. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, we have structural racism here.
Yeah, very clear Indian accent, and he told me that I was being arrested or something like that. And because I was new to Canada, I believed, right? But afterwards, I realized that I should have been more suspicious because I've never met an Indian in my whole life who has a white name, unless he has a white accent, i.e. he lives in Canada and stuff like that. So that's why I think there's no problem to be suspicious. You have to be like realistic in the situation. Similarly, if you're like in a high crime neighborhood where there's a lot of gang violence by black Africans, for example, I mean African Americans, I don't think there's a problem to be suspicious. I have to be realistic about the situation. But I won't go to a place where there's, I don't know, there's like a mix of people and no evidence of any violence by both sides or something, and just pick and choose who I think he's more probable to attack me because of his color.
Okay. So the brother's saying, the rather controversial question, potentially, in the UBC, that should he retain some suspicion of the statistical likelihood that if he gets called up by a person with a very thick Indian accent, who's called John, and informs him that he's under arrest, but hey, it can all be resolved if he just gives him some money, that he should have suspicion. Well, I was saying you should have suspicion if someone says, oh, you're going to get arrested unless you give some money anyway, right? Regardless of the accent. Well, so if they used an actual European American, you would then you would fall for it too. I hope not. Okay. I mean, look. The thing is that humans work on stereotypes. The Quran mentions in that verse where it talks about that Allah made us into nations and tribes that we may recognize each other. What that means is that stereotypes by themselves aren't bad. Okay, so if I have an Arab guest around my house and I'm going to serve some extra spicy food, I should realize that the stereotype is that Arabs like their food mostly bland, unless you're North African, right, with the harissa. But But unless you're that, then I should assume, due to statistical probability, which is what stereotype is, based on what I've heard, which could be wrong, but hey, that could be the case. But I might meet the one Khaliji Arab that loves spicy food, and he even can like eat me under the table in spice. Yeah, that might be the case. Yeah, but of course, the critical race theorists would say you commit a microaggression against that person by assuming an Arab wouldn't like spicy food. That's a microaggression. Now, the thing is this: you can't get rid of stereotypes, because everyone forms stereotypes. That, again, another emergent property. So all you should do is just be conscious that maybe the person you're speaking to might not might be an exception to that, right? Remember, a critical race theorist is an individualist, like all the liberals. So they would say, how dare you subject an individual to a collective stereotype that's not connected to them because they are an individual. That's why they could be different, hence it's not necessarily they follow that stereotype, right? So you're now imposing it on them or whatever, that kind of thing. So I would say that. As to saying that, well, if you're in a high crime neighborhood, should you suspect African Americans in a high crime neighborhood, you see them walking in a group towards you, should you suspect that? Well, you suspect it because you're in a high crime neighborhood, I suppose, that more than it was because they're African Americans or what have you, right? So you're in a high crime neighborhood. But if you're in, was it Orange County, California, a very rich place, right? And you see a group of African Americans, they're probably rich people that live nearby. And would you suspect them too? Because, because you're in Orange County, right? So anyone who's there is probably rich. Yeah, so they're not going to, steal from you, what have you. I know that you're trying to say that sometimes negative stereotypes do form. Like, for example, me saying that the Muslim world is predominantly is filled with asabi and kibr is a generalization, hence a stereotype. Okay, technically speaking, if you want to play games with a critical race theorist, when they say that oh well, you people are all racist, and you say that's a microaggression. Yeah. Well, so just because the stereotype that my people are racist, that I have to be racist, you could play it, you could turn it back on them. But my point is this: if you are going to use statistical probabilities, just be aware that the person you're speaking to might not fulfill that or be a typical instance of that, and that they might get really irritated that you suspect bad of them, because every day they get it like 100 times or something like this, which is what I know that microaggressions, they mention that this is the reason that microaggression causes harm, because every day you get treated in a certain way, it wears you down and makes you very annoyed and frustrated, and that's the true aspect. That is a true point. Fair dues when they make a true point. Yes, that might be very annoying. If every time you go on a flight, I know, and when I went to the States anyway, and they don't even care about, they will openly say you've been randomly selected, even look at you funny like, I'm trying to keep a straight face, but yeah, you've been randomly selected, just come this way, sir, and so on. And everyone, all the other, Americans look at me like, yeah, you shouldn't randomly select these Muslims, pretty much like normal. They're not even like, oh, that poor guy, probably always, probably annoying. They're like, no, I hope they lock him up. That kind of stuff. They're looking at me like that, right? So yeah, no, it can be annoying. I get it, but just beware to give the benefit of the doubt. But I say this about dealing with those who are not benefited by revelation. Okay, to your fellow brothers and sisters, they're your family. Yeah, so as Muslims, you should assume good about your family. That's the stereotype you should go with. And isn't it interesting? I bet if you assume good about people more, people actually then become good. They actually rise to your expectations of them, right? Although, as I said, there might be, there are Muslims who don't care about that and will fleece you and con you and do all kinds of bad things. So don't just blindly don't be stung from the same hole, but at the same time, assume good intentions is my point. Assume good intentions, just don't give your wallet out, readily at the drop of the hat. Yeah. So that would be my advice to you, generally speaking, from what I've seen on the Quran and Sunnah and so forth. By the way, the Prophet Muhammad so to relate this, he talks about like the Yemenis have soft hearts, for example. He makes comments about Syrians and comments imagine a Yemeni was following critical race theory and said, oh, how dare you assume that, oh, I'm a Yemeni, I have to have a soft heart. I find that a microaggression against us. Just because I'm Yemeni, I have to be soft-hearted. Right, you know, that's what they would probably say to Prophet Muhammad. That's what these critical race theory would probably say. How dare you stereotype? Right? And there could be a hard-hearted Yemeni, of course. Yeah, but you know, we have to go by statistical generalizations at times because the Yemeni culture might produce that as a common theme, but it doesn't mean every Yemeni has, you know, has been inculcated with that. So yeah, we have to. So stereotypes have usage, they have utility, but just don't do dhulm with them, and don't do kibr. Don't look down upon someone based on a stereotype. That's very important. Stereotypes don't give you permission to do kibr, by the way. Yeah, remember that. Okay, questions, contentions, anything like this? Anyone on this side? No? It's quite dilapidated that side. Okay, you sir.
So going back to the point where, let's say you want to argue against those ideologies, so like when you argue against them, right, and tell other people who have those ideologies debating with you, if you tell them that they're wrong and then bring them evidence, they will not only accuse you of being homophobic, sexist, or racist, then also, because we as Muslims represent Islam, they'll accuse Islam of being racist, and all Muslims of being racist, right? So how can we tell them that they're wrong, and it's not, the problem is not us, it's them?
Okay, well, it depends who you speak to. So, okay, so the brother says, if you criticize someone who believes in these ideologies, they'll accuse you of being racist, but they also accuse all Muslims and accuse Islam of being racist and sexist and homophobic and so on and so on and so forth. So what do you do? Well, the thing is this. So if you speak to someone who's not Muslim, and they hear you say this, now because Muslims are a minority, and you know, so the critical race, so Neo-Marxists will consider them part of one of the lower rungs of the classes in society. That's why socialists and others, they love to recruit Muslims into there, and they say, welcome Muslim, we won't persecute you. We accept your right to label yourself any way you want, just as long as that label has no content. You know, basically, yeah? You know, call yourself a Muslim, just don't represent actual what Islam says, right? Anyway, but to those who would dare say that Islam is sexist and so on and so forth, you'd have to well, just argue with them, like, well, we have a different worldview from you, and criticize their aqidah, attack the aqidah, as I said, refute their aqidah. If we're not all individualists, we're not, we don't own ourselves, the Creator made us, the Creator owns us. Anything other than having a Creator is a worldview that can't justify good or bad in the first place. Use that against them, basically, right? Refute their core creed, and that should be sufficient for you. However, if they, I mean, okay, I suppose if they, as I said, if they insist, you have to undermine the basis of their argument. You can't just argue that I think what you're doing is wrong, or I think this lifestyle is wrong, because they'll say, well, then you're a bigot for not thinking, for thinking that, yeah. So okay, well, a bigot is a value judgment, and what are the values you're using to make that judgment, and let's criticize those values. That's what I would recommend you do. As to those who call themselves Muslim and have those same beliefs and ideas, that's a problem, because they won't say Islam is the problem, but they'll certainly say you're the problem. Then they'll say that not Islam, but they'll say your interpretation of Islam is the problem, and is bigoted and sexist and so on and so forth. And so the only difference between them and non-Muslims is that the non-Muslims might say that Islam itself is the problem, but they'll say that because they want to call themselves Muslim still, they'll say that your understanding of Islam is the problem, even if it's the mainstream. They'll say, okay, yeah, the mainstream understanding is a problem, and so on and so forth. So they have no, but again, criticize the Aqidah. Although those who want to call themselves Muslim, you have the extra weapon, you could say, of arguing that, well, epistemologically speaking, the mainstream Islam is the only Islam there has ever been throughout history. So unless the creator of the universe and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ are really bad communicators and somehow messed up, and how everyone around them didn't understand what they were saying on the most key issues, and the wording they used was wrong in the Quran because it wasn't clear enough, then unless you're saying that, then you have to concede that what you call mainstream Islam is actual Islam. Or the incorrect version of Islam is actual Islam. Someone did that yesterday, actually. Someone, I'm not judging him. Maybe he's a sincere brother who just has been lied to, or he's read the wrong books, or he's got confused. I don't judge the person herself. Allah knows what's inside him, his heart. But you all saw my response to him yesterday. You can check it out when the video comes out. So debating someone who's a Muslim who adopts these ideas, you have an extra set of weapons you could say you could use, which is the Islamic epistemology is pretty solid. And the point of this whole week is to actually refute anyone who calls themselves a Muslim and adopts these ideologies, to be able to refute that from an Islamic basis. If you want to see how to refute it from a just using rationality, I suppose, would be the best way of putting it, as in using the mind, using akal, using general thinking, and so on and so forth. I've done most of my debates are with non-Muslims, actually. I debate non-Muslims on these ideologies themselves. So you can check them out if you'd like, just to see an example. There are other dawah that do the same as well, which debate liberalism and Marxism and so on and so forth. So check it out if you want guidance on that. Anyone else? No? And you, brother with the green.
For fellow Muslims who aren't as strong in the religion, for example, for prayer, they're not regularly praying. So is it a lie to give the partial view of prayer in terms of its physical benefits and merits rather than its spiritual, which they will not relate to, just to hook them into prayer? Would that be considered lying?
Well, so if someone's not praying as much as they should, or not doing all their prayers, should we give hikmah reasons, wisdoms behind the prayer, as well as the obligation of the prayer, telling them the obligation of which they probably already know? Well, I say, look, do whatever you can to actually get someone to pray. Really, a man goes up to Prophet Muhammad and says he wants to commit zina. He wants permission to commit zina. Right? You know this, right? And the Prophet Muhammad doesn't say haram alayk, like shame upon you, or it's forbidden upon you, aib alayk, is shame upon you. He doesn't say that, right? He says, to paraphrase, would you like if I made it permissible for your mother to commit zina? He goes, no. So then how can I make it permissible for you? And the guy actually understood it and was satisfied with the answer. So any which way that conveys the wisdoms behind it, whether it's how the prayer fulfills our nature as human beings, created beings, because that's what hikmah is. Hikmah is explaining how it fulfills our intended nature and purpose. That's what hikmah explaining is as an approach, rather than just saying it's obligatory. Many Muslims are liberals because they don't see the hikmah behind Islamic laws, right? And I think in 2011 I pioneered doing lectures explaining just the hikmah of the Sharia, like how it makes better sense and solves human problems better than liberalism does, which is why I can now reference it to you right now, right? Because that was 12 years ago when I started doing those things in UK universities. Basically, got quite popular actually. If you wanted to see how Islamic law compares with liberalism and how it achieves better results when applied, that is. Yeah. So that's what. Yeah. There's no problem. So convince that person to pray any which way you can through hikmah and exhortation to the truth, basically. What does the Quran say? Call with wisdom and fair speech, right? So that's what you should be doing. Okay, brother, right at the corner down there.
I don't think this is really relevant, but how to respond to Muslims who say they're spiritual but not religious?
How to respond to Muslims who say they're spiritual and not religious? Well, simply ask them, what do you mean by spiritual? Because it's a very vague term. I think many Muslims don't even know what spiritual even means. I think they just mean that basically they they enjoy the feeling of believing there's God and like thinking about it sometimes, but they don't want to do anything about it. Basically, yeah.
What I've seen is they'll be like, I don't really have to pray 5 times a day. It's between me and my God, and that's what I've seen. But as long as the niyyah is there, I'm fine.
As long as the intention is there. Okay, I tell you what you should do with that person is, he says, as long as the intention is okay. Let's say to him, that you need to borrow, let's say, I don't know, $100, $200, okay, from that person. All right, and then you say, I'm going with this. Okay, and then I say, don't worry, I'll pay you back. 1 month goes by, 1 year goes by, and goes like, brother, you borrowed $100 from me, can I have it back? And I say, look, I intend to give it back to you. And I say, okay, but can you give it back? No, it's not a problem. The niyyah is there. It's fine. Yeah? So, just simply say that, look, people say, I don't need to pray, it's between me and my God. Well, you praying is between you're praying to God, right? So you're being deficient in what is between you and your God. This is why we're having this conversation in the first place. We're not praying for us. You're not praying to us, right? So obviously that's ridiculous to say it's between me and my God, right? Like, of course, but like, if you were taking crack cocaine and I wanted to, and you were failing in your studies and you were having health problems, and I'd tell you, hey, I'm concerned for you, don't take it. And you say it's between me and my crack dealer. It's like, well, look, I guess that your transaction is, but it's not good for you, and I can tell you that, right? Or you could simply say, yes, and me giving advice to you is also something I'll be accounted for between me and my God too. So I'm here satisfying a relationship that's between me and my God, right? So you can just use that against him. It's a ridiculous argument. So simply say, look, if you're not convinced by is there some aspect of Islam that you're not convinced by, or you don't see the importance in, then let's discuss that. But don't make an excuse for that, right?
They usually say Allah judges on the intent, again, not on the action. It's on the intent behind the action. For example, again, like someone I think based on my intention to think, not because of something that's like actually defined.
All right. Well, it's kind of like. It's kind of like, let's say someone gets a pistol, goes out in the middle of the street, starts shooting people, right? Police arrest him, and it's like, oh, why are you killing people? I said, no, that wasn't my intention. I was just doing target practice. I wanted moving targets, right? That was my intention, right? And, humans are very good at moving, so I just thought I'd target them. But I didn't intend to kill anybody, just to wound them, right? They think you're crazy, right? It's stupid, right? Intention relates to action. Because I can't intend, I suppose you can intend to do no action, but not doing any action is intent to not act, right? So yeah, you're right, you could turn action judged by intention if you're doing actions. If you do any actions, yeah? If you don't do any actions, there's no intention then, is there, right? Yeah. So just point out the ridiculousness of it, really. Any other points and things before we wrap up? Because just before anyone else goes, I want to make a little announcement. Basically, there are 2 points. One of them is there's been questions that Muslim students need access to good training providers for a holistic understanding of Islam and how to deal with issues and problems and so on and so forth. So I know that there's free courses being offered by the I3 Institute that do young Da'i program, YD program. So, because you're students on a budget, if our MSAs want to consider basically having free holistic training that trains you all the way from fiqh and tajweed all the way to and purpose of life all the way to how to deal with day-to-day problems, including kibr and asabiyya and things like that, then do benefit from those courses and so on and so forth, because they're generally offered for free. So, and your students might as well avail yourself of it, because some students were asking questions about how can MSA students avail themselves of training that can help them, without having to pay for the nose, so to speak, and give a holistic understanding of Islam instead of just having tajweed classes but not teaching them about these things and how to avoid falling into the traps of these ideologies. So that I want to make that one clear. But the second public announcement message is, so how many people here from SFU still remaining? Okay, so yeah. All right, so brothers, I want you to implore all Muslims in SFU to come here, and all the remaining UBC students to come here tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a day of days. All right, and trust me, it's not hype. This is not just hype, right? Trust me on this. Yeah, it shall be a day. It shall be a day of hisab, but not the day of hisab, right? Yeah. So a day of accounting, right? Regarding all these, everything I've been teaching for this whole week gets brought together and applied to practical case studies. Let's just put it like that, yeah? So you guys need to be there because I think your university needs to be inoculated, your student society needs to be inoculated against any problems that may arise in the future. You think, well, it hasn't risen that much in the past. Well, yeah, but, some other MSAs thought that until it happened, just, a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, who knows? Anyway, so you need to inoculate yourself, and we need to hear the truth of the matter, because I know Vancouver is a very small community in a sense that everyone knows each other, kind of, right? So there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be going around, and we want to discuss them openly and let everyone talk about it and mention it, and everyone's welcome, like regardless of who they are or whichever beliefs they follow or who their friends are. Everybody is welcome to that. And yeah, just bring as many brothers and sisters as you can. It will be of high relevance to any student who goes to university, and especially anyone who's part of an MSA. Extreme relevance to yourself. So that would be my second public announcement. Okay, that is all. Go ahead, brother.
Jazakallah khair for the lecture. But I wanted to ask a question regarding the Neo-Marxists. When they use this claim, check your privilege.
Yes.
This is something that they always put forward.
Yep.
Whenever they want to talk about something that is racially motivated. Personally, I've been asked this question, and then I've never in any Islamic discourse been asked to check my privilege as a white Arab man. So it was to me, it was a shock why this supposed to happen. And I just wanted to ask you, where does that relate in their theory? Is this a critical race theory? Is this?
Check your privilege is in both neo-Marxist feminist theory, neo-Marxist race theory, neo-Marxist queer theory, everything. So quite simply, they argue that it comes from standpoint epistemology, where basically they say that the oppressed know better than the oppressors about the oppression. And that if you reject what they say, or disagree, or do the unforgivable crime of saying, "Can I have some dalil, maybe? Just some little bit of evidence?" How dare you? Right? And remember, and they could probably slap you because you can't oppress the oppressor, by the way. Right? So that's it. Yeah, of course. No, I'm not joking. Theoretically, they could do that, right? And they'll say they're not oppressing you because you're in the oppressor class, as a white Arab, basically. So because you don't know, they know better than you about the oppression that you're clearly doing. They will say that they just have a simpler way of saying it, the same thing, which is they call it your privilege. You're blind to your privilege. Your privilege is invisible to the one who has it. So you need to check your privilege. Okay, because you have a privilege. Now, if it's a Muslim that's saying it to you, that's more difficult. But if it's actually it's not. If a non-Muslim says it, you say no. You're non-Muslim, so you're the majority. I'm a Muslim. I'm the minority, so I'm in the oppressed class here, and you're in the oppressor class. And of course, if it's a Muslim saying it to you, you say, well, yeah. Again, I'm a non-Marxist, non-left-wing, non-right-wing, non-anything Muslim, and you're a Muslim that follows the dominant ideologies of this state, of this land. So I'm in the minority, and you're in the majority. So I'm the oppressed group, and it's no, but that's not. I'm not the oppressor. Oh, that's because you're blind to your privilege, and you wouldn't be able to see it. Yeah, you can just turn it back. But I'll tell you this, right? These Muslims who've adopted these ideas, the unscrupulous ones amongst them, if they fail or they lose achieving their objectives against whatever they want to do for you, MSA or what have you, they'll have no problem in it calling their allies, non-Muslim allies, to come in and enforce stuff against you. Yeah, these people. They'll go to their awliya, their true awliya, and it's not you, it's not the fellow Muslims, it is those who believe in left-wing stuff amongst non-Muslims. And of course, some might say, al-kufr millata wahida, right? Kufr is one religion, right? And so they are going to their co-religionists for help against you. So they will oppress you if they can't win, because they think they are trying to liberate you, or rather stop your oppression against minorities, whereas obviously they are the ones who are doing the oppression in that case. Okay, you brother, the checkered shirt.
So do they have like a gradient of like how white you are, the more privilege you have? Like how does it work?
Yeah, basically, do they have a gradient? Yes, the more white you are, the more privilege you have. But the more closer you are to whiteness, so white adjacent, because if you're not European, but you could pass as a white person, so your skin's lighter. But let's say you look Arab, right? But you've got light skin, so they say you're white adjacent. You're next to white, but you're not white yourself.
Asians come in it too, like.
Yeah, Asians are. Yeah, so Asians would be a bit lower down than white passing Arabs, but they would be higher than African Americans and so on and so forth. Yeah. Sorry, by Asians, I'm using the British meaning of that, which is South Asian, in like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. I'm using that definition, but yeah.
So if you're like really white, but you're just like really poor, and you're like in a single mother family household, you're like broke and you still have privilege?
So if you're a broke, in a trailer park dweller type individual, or even a homeless white person that has no money at all, and so on and so forth, yeah, you still have privilege. You have privilege in your whiteness. Because whiteness, you might have no property, but whiteness is your property. So they say that, yes.
So back to the privilege thing.
Okay.
Is the whiteness more like physical or on a identity basis?
Yeah, they say race is a construct, and that is, okay, that you're physically white, or quote unquote, as in you meet the criteria that would be grant you the privilege of this social construct called whiteness. So you could fit into that, because I mean, technically speaking, you can't identify as being white if you're not white, because of physicalities. Although postmodernists could argue that you can identify as anything you want, and postmodernists have fights with neo-Marxists. I mentioned it yesterday. You know, there was a white English man, I think, who identified as a Korean woman, and he was arguing against a Afro-Caribbean woman, in the UK we call Afro-Caribbeans as a category, not African British. We don't have European British, African British, white British. We just have Afro-Caribbean or white or that kind of stuff. Anyway, so argument, and because she was arguing that he's appropriating another race's culture by calling himself. Identifying himself with that race, with another race. Yeah. So neo-Marxists and postmodernists would fight each other on these things. So because the postmodernists would say you can identify as a 7-year-old Chinese girl, right?
Like, the reason I was asking this is because, for example, so I'm the 3rd generation that was born and raised in Ghana, in Africa. So if I come and I'm arguing with them and I say I identify as a black person,
yeah,
will I be privileged or not privileged?
No. The postmodernists would say that, regardless of what people's opinions might be of you, due to the narrative they hold in their head, you can legitimately identify as a black person, and they don't really care. Whereas the neo-Marxists would say that it's not you that gives your self-identity; it's the structure of society that gives you the classification, and so. It's not you that gives yourself your classification. You're classified by the structure. Yeah. Brother.
Having an affiliation to a certain culture, for example, you raised the point of the hadith that was about Yemenis.
Yeah.
I am Yemeni.
Okay.
Once.
How's your soft heart?
Allahu Akbar.
Okay.
I mean, but once I see and I read the history of Yemen and knowing that the majority of Sahaba, Aws wal Khazraj, were coming from Yemen,
Yeah.
you get a sense of being proud about being affiliated or originated from that specific part of the world. But at the same time, there are two conditions that must be met in that context. The first one, don't look at others with lowering their positions at all. The second one, consider the affiliation to Islam to be much important and to be much concentrated than the affiliation toward that specific culture. So, in this position, am I in the safe place?
Well, look, the hadith says that Allah has removed from us the pride of arrogance of the age of Jahiliyyah and the glorification of ancestors. Okay, so look, you can say I'm from this land, or I have ancestry in this land. Okay, that's not a problem. You can say that you love the land. Like the land, but you're always going to love the land you grew up in. It has a sense of home for you, especially during your childhood. The Prophet Muhammad actually he loved Medina, right? And I think this was related. There was a hadith where he talks about Hubb al-Watan, like love of the land, not the country, not the nation state. It's misunderstood today. Love of the land is like faith. It's like it's from faith. It's a paraphrase. But he's not from Medina, is he? Right? He's from Mecca, right? Isn't it? Yeah. So but he has no ancestry. Okay. I think there's a maternal uncle or aunt or somewhere there, but he doesn't have actual. He's not from Medina or Yathrib before, and yet he had love of it as love as the land. You can love a land you grew up in, or land that you're not, your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents didn't come from. Ultimately, you can still love a land. I like Vancouver. It's a nice place, got mountains around, it's very beautiful. So I like it. But to say that your ancestors give you some kind of moral value, or that it gives you moral value that you have ancestors that are this, and this, would be glorification of ancestors, basically, which you can't do. However, a Muslim can be happy that he has ancestors who were if they were upon the deen, that did good deeds, that were righteous, right? So that is the exception, but that doesn't make you special. It just means it's something that you can love and enjoy. The fact that my ancestors were upon the deen, and they did good deeds, right? So that is allowed. Because there's a hadith on this. I don't have it to hand, but there's a hadith that allows that. Yeah. So that would be what the hadith says. So yeah. I was just reminding me. Sorry, I believe there was an issue between the Himyariya, southern Arabs, right, and the Mudarabi. No, who's the northern Arabs. The Himyariya used to take pride that they were more pure Arabs than the northern Arabs, because the northern Arabs had mixed with Ismail, right, and they'd become like watered down, quote unquote, kind of. Look, this is kibr. We're the real Arabs, but these Ismailites who came in and just Ishmaelites and intermarried, these are not pure Arabs. This is kibr and asabi, so that would be bad as well.
How do neo-Marxists rationalize acts of oppression between the same minorities that haven't had this white colonial history? Like, for instance, say before the...
So how do they rationalize that someone could be an oppressive group without being white and being part of the white oppressive system that living under? Very easily. Let's take a random example. Let's say Arabs are oppressors. They oppress black people in Africa. Therefore, if you are black yourself, you can say bad things about Arabs because Arabs are the oppressor group against black people in Africa, even though, but we're in Canada, so what's it got to do with Africa? And say, but it applies globally, so, but they're still the oppressor group, So, that's how they justify it. They can find something. Right? I suppose if they're disconnected, I don't know. I'm trying to give an example now. Let's say Sri Lankans versus African Americans. They could just probably say that they're not oppressors, but they have more privilege than African Americans, because at least they're not recognized as black, and black is like on the lower rung of the African American society stratification. So they would simply say that they wouldn't say necessarily that Sri Lankans are oppressors, but they'll probably say that they are benefiting from an oppressive system more than those lower down the rung on the system. That's how they'd say it. Anyone else? Look, I want to call it a day.